Getting live
Chilling
here.
new aerial footage showing the moment protesters
go.
breached the
Welcome
Capitol
to-
grounds on January 6th.
All right, let me get rid of that. Sorry about that, folks. Welcome to the Great American Mail live stream of the January 6th Witch Hunt Committee, the show trial, day 2. Let's see if they've started. They're supposed to start at 10 o'clock. They're still there. They are right there. We're not missing anything. So before we get to the hearing, it's supposed to start at 10 o'clock. We got about 8 or 9 minutes. We're coming to air a little bit late. I think I had said we were going to be here at 9:45 a.m. Unfortunately, it's more like 9:51. My computer, technological difficulties. My computer literally has this thing where it just starts erasing everything that's on the screen, and you just have to shut it down. I really don't. It's kind of spooky. I'm not even really sure what it's doing. If anybody has any idea what that might be, by the way, Publius@gamcast.net, Publius. If you look in the description, and by the way, you should subscribe by now. We're going to be covering these January 6 hearings. If you look around our channel, you'll see that we have a lot of January 6 up there. I've got a tweet up here. We're going to bring you up to speed on hearing day 1 before we start day 2. But anyway, if you want to follow us other places, we do a daily podcast. We do single issue live streams, as you can see throughout our channel. So anyway, take a look around. Hope you like it. So day 1 of the January, and by the way, before we start that, let's back up and understand what we're dealing with here. January 6th, this hearing, these are show trials. They're not quite show trials in the sense that we know the result before the end. That's a technical definition of a communist show trial. But other than that, they're a show trial. And why are they a show trial? Well, they're done in secrecy, right? I mean, that's not an American thing. In fact, the fact that the Democrats, ever since the first sham impeachment to this, that the public and the media lets them get away with doing in secret, it's nuts. We haven't seen all this evidence, and there's no reason we shouldn't be able to see it. So even if you let them do it in secret, by the time you're done with the secrecy, then give us all the evidence and let's have a trial. That's the way trials work. Again, we're a Florida and Georgia lawyer practiced throughout the USA, so we've been practicing law for 25 years. That's not the way it works. You have to show everything, right? And then when you go to trial, they still haven't showed us everything. Why else is it a show trial? There's no opposition. You can't be the opposition party if you were put on the committee by Nancy Pelosi, and we know that that is the case because we know that Kevin McCarthy sent 5 Republicans. Nancy vetoed 2, so he pulled them all. Then she appointed 2 Republicans. They're not opposition. And you'll see when we get to these hearings, they're not opposition. So anyway, it's a show trial. We know it's a show trial. It's all just trying to influence the public. We shall see if it works. So what did they do on the first day? Well, on the first day, and you look, I had primers, what you need to know about the January 6 hearings, part 1 and 2 on our channel. They did 6 things. I had predicted they would try to do 2. They did do the first 2 that I predicted. The first one was, as you see here, first January 6 hearings reveal committee is going to go all in. They're going to go all in, try to prove. There's actually 6 things. I'm going to go through the 5 here. Let's double check, make sure they're not on yet. They're warming up. They're still not there yet. Well, don't worry. You're not going to miss anything. All right, so here we go. Get rid of that one. All right. Trump caused the violence. First thing I'm going to try to show is essentially Trump caused it. Why did Trump cause the violence? Well, because they were there because he said so. That's their strongest claim, folks. And I don't agree with it, but give the devil its due. All right, that challenging Biden's certification is a coup. I think that's what we're going to hear a lot of today, folks. We've got articles about that at our Substack page, which you can find here. Again, there are links in the description, and we also have articles up here about that on our YouTube page that you're on now. All right, what else are they going to try to prove? They're going to try to prove that Trump incited the violence. Now, that's the Brandenburg claim. We're going to go over that this morning. We're going to go over Brandenburg, what you have to prove to make a Brandenburg claim. That's the legal claim of incitement. There's no protection. There are various exceptions to your First Amendment rights: time, place, and manner, child pornography, the copyright laws. You cannot, the torts that are, you can't take people's actual material and reuse it, right? You can't say you're using the First Amendment. And incitement to violence, it's an exception. So they're going to try to prove that. They'll never be able to do it under Brandenburg, right? And we'll explain why, but don't worry about that. All right. That Trump was derelict in duty and not calling off the mob. This is absurd. Not going to go anywhere as well, but they're going to try to prove it. Again, they're going all in. Any trial lawyer will tell you, you got to prove to the jury, and we're the jury, right? And this is not criminal, so it's civil, so be preponderance of the evidence, 50% plus one more, and then you got there. All right, they're trying to prove too much. Anyway, Trump not eligible for future office. That's Section 14 of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. We're going to go over that today, too. You need to know that one. That's also tough. The 6th one here, I couldn't get in there because the tweets are limited. The 6th one is going to be, they're still not there, so we got some time. The 6th one is going to be, and it's really kind of weird. If you watch the first hearing, again, we live streamed the first hearing. When you finish with us this morning, you can go back and you can watch that one if you want. The problem with the sixth one is it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but essentially they're going to say the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys also were going to engage in some sort of insurrection, and they spoke to Trump's people or something. I'm not really sure. Again, it's the type of thing that to amateurs sounds like a good idea. It's sort of a kitchen sink approach is what we're seeing from them so far. It's like, let me just say all the negative things I can say about Trump, and let's just throw it all up against the wall, see if anything sticks. That's not the way you win a case with juries. And again, if this ends up being sort of a jury situation, hearing day one was awful. If it ends up just being a public relations politic type of thing, hearing day one was just not good. But we shall see what day two brings us. They still are not in there. That's interesting. I don't really want to listen to the talking heads. So let's go through and let's go over to our GreatAmericanMail, Substack.com. Again, subscribe. If you scroll down in the description here, I've put a link tree that will get you to this page. If you get to this page, you will find we were covering this way back when. We covered Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. What are they talking about there? Scroll all the way down to December 30th, if I am not mistaken, and I am not. There it is right there. A Democrat coup, Part 1, January 6th, is Democrats' latest scheme to ensnare their political opponents. What were they trying to do? Well, if you go back to that article and you click on it, Mark Elias, Democrat super lawyer, he was Hillary's campaign general counsel. He's been general counsel to all the Democrat campaigns, I think going all the way back to Clinton. Anyway, if you scroll down on the article, you will see right down here, here's Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, all right? Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. I'll highlight it for you there so you can see it. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president, vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state. Basically, anybody in government, right, who having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress, and they repeat the language again, basically anybody in government, shall have engaged in insurrection. Let me highlight that for you. Shall have engaged in an insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. That means you're not eligible, right? You're not eligible to be anywhere in government if you engage in that. So they're going to try to prove that Trump's still not up. It's 9:59, folks. They're going to have to hurry up to get in there. Anyway, so they're going to try to prove that Trump is, and not just Trump, folks. I want you to, let me highlight the relevant language here. So anybody who shall have engaged, right, in an insurrection or rebellion, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. That is extremely broad. So that would be not just, if you can prove Trump engaged in insurrection, don't worry, I don't think they can. And by the way, that's Eastman versus Thompson. So if I can pull that up, we might get through that today. Microsoft Word, there it is. There's Eastman versus Thompson. Let me bring it up so you can see it. We'll go through that if we need to as well. That's the case where the court said more likely than not. But let's get back to Safari because that's really where we're going to keep most of our information this morning. So going back to Safari, you'll see that they're going to try to prove that. Let's see if they're coming in here. Man, they're still not there. What in the world? They're getting like the president. I mean, 10 is 10, folks. All right? I don't see any technical difficulties in there. You should be up here. Anyway, so that started. Now, that all started with a tweet from Mark Elias, I told you. That is the tweet right there. And I want to show you something, folks. Mark Elias tweeted this out, okay? Listen to this. Let me highlight it for you if I can. I might. Okay, good. I thought I can. I'll tell you why I thought I wouldn't be able to do it in a minute. Anyway, my prediction for 2022, before the midterm election, we will have serious discussion about whether individual Republican members are disqualified by Section 3 of the 14th Amendment from serving in Congress. We may even see litigation. Now, we all know then, right? And it doesn't have the date. Oh, it does have the date of the tweet. December 21st down there at the bottom. Down there at the bottom, you'll see December 21st, 2021. That's what caused me to write the article that you're now looking at. Well, let's go check out that tweet. It's been deleted. He deleted the tweet. Anyway, we captured it. We got it. It's it's always forever on the interwebs. It's still not there. They're supposed to be here at 10. I'm not going to let the talking head. Should I let the talking head talk? Maybe I should let the talking head talk. Well.
His employee. But Catherine, let me ask you
Still
about
nothing.
something you've been following.
All right, we're going to stop them. We don't want to listen to them. They're not going to tell us anything. They probably don't even know this stuff. So anyway, getting back to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, this is where you've seen all across America that they've used this to try and say that you engage in insurrection. They did it against Matt Gaetz. They did it against Marjorie Taylor Greene. They did it against Madison Cawthorn. They've done it against a bunch of people out there. And we wrote that article at December 30th of last year. It's a two-parter. It's a lot of going on in there. But the Democrat part 2 coup part 2 is in here, and this will walk you through a little bit of the second part of what they're going to try to claim was an insurrection. Now, there's a lot to unpack in this, and I mean a lot. So you basically have to understand, and this article will walk you through it. But let's see what the committee. I don't understand why they're not there. That's weird. Let's pull up election of 1800 because that's where this all starts. My computer is not. There it is. Election of 1800. See what it brings up. Log.gov. Okay, Wikipedia will be fine. So I like to use, again, for those of you who are new, I like to use left-wing sites. That way nobody can accuse me of doing anything that I'm using biased sources. So we all know Wikipedia is left-wing. So the election of 1800 was between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. And you see there the vice presidential running mates were Aaron Burr and Charles Pinckney. I think last time we did this, I couldn't remember who the running mate for John Adams was. It doesn't matter. So this was our third presidential, I guess it would have been technically our fourth. Washington obviously won the first two. The third one was won by Adams. He became the second president of the United States. This was the fourth in 1800. What was different about the election of 1800, folks, and you need to understand this, is that election was the first time you voted for president and vice president on the same ticket. Before, you had just voted for president, and whoever finished second was the vice president. Still not there. That's weird. So anyway, until we're going to get you up to speed on the basics of January 6th, this part of it anyway, the legal part of it. And this is if you go back to the tweet, see if that's still up yet. This is part 2, that challenging Biden's certification as a coup. We'll walk you through that. All right. So what happened was, because they were running as a ticket, when they went to go and count the electoral votes, Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr both had 73 electoral votes, which meant they were tied. So then the election went to the House. Well, in the House, the Federalist Party, as you can see here, represented by John Adams, sorry about that, and the Democratic Republican, or a lot of people in history call them the Jeffersonians, right? The Jeffersonians. They, the Federalists, just to mess with them in the House, they started voting for Aaron Burr. So I think it went, well, let's scroll down. They'll tell us here. I think it went 40-some times or so. How many times did it go? All right, doesn't matter. Anyway, it went about 40 times, and it was tied. And finally, Alexander Hamilton, yes, that Alexander Hamilton, he of the musical, and he went and said, guys, come on, you stop this. We all know Jefferson's supposed to be the president, and Aaron Burr is supposed to be the vice president. So a few Federalists flipped, okay? They flipped over and decided to vote for Jefferson, and he became the president. Now, little slight history here. Aaron Burr was shot. Some people say murdered, right? I mean, or Alexander Hamilton was shot, some say murdered, by Aaron Burr. He was not happy about what Alexander Hamilton did here. He didn't like Hamilton for other reasons as well. But just throwing that out there, folks. There's a great book out there called Burr, if you ever want to read about that story in a very, very humorous way. Well, that led to the 12th. Let's pull up the 12th Amendment, see what comes up. That led to the 12th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, right? And this is largely where January 6th gets started, because it talks about here that the electors shall meet with their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president, one of whom, yada, yada, yada. It goes down. It provides the day, which ends up being January 6th, etc. All right. So the 12th Amendment basically it did a few things, but the main thing it did, you need to understand, is it took the situation where you were voting for president, right, where you could have a tie again. Now it's clear. You're going to vote for president and you're going to vote for vice president, right? They're going to be two separate tickets here. Because before they had this place, what in the world are they doing? Why aren't they there? I mean, this is just Biden-esque. It really is. But anyway, all right, it gives me time to educate you on all this stuff. So after the 12th Amendment was passed in around 1804, eventually Congress started to have some contentious elections. So we're going to go to the Electoral Count Act of 1887. So you can do all this stuff yourself. You can go back. You see, I'm not manipulating anything. So the Electoral Count Act of 1887 came about because they'd had some elections. The election, I believe, of 1876 is one of them. And so, well, here we go right here. Close elections in 1880 and 1884 followed, and again raised the possibility of no formally established accounting procedure. So what they were upset about was, well, 1876 was the big one. That's what I thought. So what happened is you had states sending different electors, and people weren't sure what to do. So the Electoral Count Act of 1887 was Congress trying to say, here's a procedure by which we're going to pick the president, right? If there's contentious in there. So they had to provide for this whole way and mechanism of doing it. And if you go to our GreatAmericanMail.substack.com page, I think it's our third article on January 6th, which you can find. Where is it? I think it's right here. This one, the Democrat coup continues. So it walks you back through Section 3. It talks about the procedure. It should say in here. Yeah, it does. All right. So then this walks you, well, no, maybe the fourth one. Let's see if it's the fourth one. No, that's he didn't commit a crime. I think that'll have it in there. But let's see. Eastman memo. No, that's gonna. Yeah, here we go. So this walks you through how the Electoral Count Act of 1887 works, right? And so basically what happens is on January 6th, the vice president presiding comes in and starts opening the envelopes. They should be there by now. They're still not there. You got to be kidding me. It's 10:08. What in the world is going on? I'm really surprised. Anyway, all right. So it provides for different procedures by which you can come in and object to the election. All right. So essentially, you come in, and if anybody, you go in alphabetical order. You start with the states. If anybody raises an objection, you just can't get up and raise an objection. It's an important point here. You have to have a senator or a congressperson. You have to have both to sign on. Now, on January 6, 2021, President Trump had 8 senators and had 139 representatives ready to go. And what they were going to do is they were going to object to the electors. He also had alternate electors from the swing states. And the plan is not really clear because they still haven't flushed out what happened or exactly what the plan was. I'm not even sure the president's people have told us what the actual plan was. But it appears to be they were going to try to keep the election objection process going on so long that eventually the House would get thrown, or the election would get thrown to the House. Now, when the election gets thrown to the House, you have to understand it is not whoever has the majority controls the day. Each state gets a vote. So if each state gets a vote, it depends on how many states are controlled by Republicans or how many states are controlled by Democrats. Spoiler alert, the answer to that is Republicans have had the majority of the states for quite some time now. Okay, and that's because you have big Democrat coalitions coming from California and New York that are not offset by Florida and Texas. So anyway, one other important thing about that, just so you understand, is here we go. In 2004, Democrats objected to the certification of George W. Bush's certification. Now, it didn't result in anything other than I think it took them till the next day. I thought we had a cite to that in here. In fact, I think we got time. See if we got time here. Yeah, we do. Let's just show that just for giggles, because you're going to hear a lot this morning. I believe it's going to be this morning they're going to do it. If not, they'll do it in a future hearing. They're going to get to part 2, right? And part 2 is challenging Biden's certification. I'll highlight it, is a coup. We've got a lot of articles up there about that. But they're going to say, hey, when you tried to challenge his certification, that itself is a coup. And that's not the way it works. And so I cite in here that they challenged Bush's. Let's see what happens if we put in Bush 2004 certification challenge. See what comes up. Just bam. Even Google, folks, even Google is ratting them out here. There you go, right there. All right. Alleging widespread irregularities on Election Day, a group of Democrats in Congress objected Thursday to the counting of Ohio's 20 electoral votes, delaying the official certification of the 2004 presidential election results. Right? The move was not designed to overturn the election. Okay, well, how do you know? If this were our media today and there was a Republican doing this, that's what they were doing. We read minds. Anyway, said Representative Stephanie Tubbs Jones and California Senator Bobby Boxer. So Trump was trying to do this procedure that Democrats had executed in 2004. Well, it actually would have been January of 2005, but you know what I mean. Anyway, they were trying to use that procedure on January 6th. The difference is that Trump had a lot more states ready to go. If you want to read about that, I really would recommend the articles that we have up here. And it's interesting. One of those things that they were using to do it, right, was this so-called Eastman memo. And you can click on it. You can get the Eastman memo there and read the whole thing. It's 6 pages. Now, there's a long form Eastman memo and there's a short form. This is, I don't know why it does that. Let me scroll down. I should be able to get to the actual Eastman memo. I'm not sure why my browser's not doing that. Document. Let's do plain text. Well, same. Anyway, if you look at the Eastman memo, you'll see in there he lays out the plan to challenge the election, just like the Democrats had in the past. So there's no basis to claim it's a coup. And they have gotten a judge. I can't believe they're not there. It's unbelievable. Oh my goodness. Oh wow. Let's see what CBS is doing here.
Stolen from you, from me, and from the country.
Even though he and his team knew it was a lie.
He was told repeatedly by people that he trusted, that he respected, people like, folks around him, that the election...
See, this is the type of thing they're going to do. I don't understand why they do it. So this argument is, well, Trump was told by some people that there was no truth to this fraud stuff. And so, then he knew it was false. No, he didn't. I mean, we all know that Trump is the type of person that he doesn't think his underlings know better than him. I'd be willing to bet you he thought he was the person who knew the most about the election than anybody, even Bill Barr, anybody else. So I'm not really sure where they come up with that. But again, this is the type of weakness. Imagine you had almost a year of time behind closed doors to interview people, come up with evidence, and the best you can do is, Trump knew there was no fraud in the election because some of his advisors told him. It looks like they're coming in. I mean, can you imagine? This is exactly the type of weakness we're going to see all morning here. All morning. Oh, apparently it's not. Let's see what's going on.
Government is investigating.
Let's bring in Scott McFarlane as well as Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa. Robert, first to you. You've reported significantly on the big lie, which is the focus of today's hearing. What are you expecting members of the committee to bring up? I think what people want now is evidence. What are you hearing?
They are going to focus on a key period in the days after the 2020 election, a crossroads where then President Trump made a decision to go against his advisors who were telling him it was time to wrap things up, eventually fight in the courts, but ultimately this was a losing battle. And he instead sided with lawyers like Rudy Giuliani, who provided him with conspiracy theories that the election was stolen. Trump embraced those theories. What this committee wants to paint a picture of today is the president's decision to go down that path.
So, Scott, what can we expect?
All right, that they're right about that, folks. We're loaded for bear because I know that backwards and forwards, and I've walked you through a lot of it, so you now know a lot of it as well. That's great. I hope they're right about that. So let's go back to where we were in the article, because that's this article here, right? No, Trump didn't commit a crime. This is exactly where they're going, and we're going to keep an eye on that. But let's go through this article because this is going to educate you. That's where they're going. Okay. They've been. I'm going to skip past that. Okay. Here we go. Setting aside the obvious fact that the House has no power to prosecute or even investigate crimes, the major hurdle of the theory of an imminent Department of Justice indictment is that Trump committed no election-related crime on January 6th. And I literally just told you a moment ago why that is. Again, let's pull it up. What he did was he was going to do it on 6 or 7 states. All right, so let's go election, certification, challenge, 2004. You can do that yourself. Bam, it's now number 2. Whatever I said before, Democrats who praised objection Electoral College. That's interesting. That might be an article. That's probably a Fox News basically pointing this out. Anyway, here it is right here. This Trump's plan, what we're going to hear apparently from the committee, is doing what Barbara Boxer and Stephanie Tubbs Jones did on a larger scale, right? Because they only did 1 state. Now, I want you to understand, remember the election. Ohio, he doesn't get to 270 without Ohio, folks. So Trump was going to challenge 6. Only he needed 3 to kick it below 270. If it's below 270, it goes to the House. Second thing you have to remember, and I want you to keep this in mind. They're going to talk about democracy and this, that, and the other. How is it anti-democratic to throw the election to the House? It's democratic. The Constitution provides that for a mechanism for people to be elected to be president of the United States. So, okay, the talking heads, we don't listen to them. They know what they're talking about. All right, so going back. So right here. All right, to be sure, the January 6th Selection Committee has various theories upon which to believe that Trump could and should be prosecuted. These I literally pulled out of the case I just showed you a moment ago. I pulled those. These are from the January 6th committee. Oh, sorry about that. We're having tough technology this morning. Where is that? There it is. There's that document. All right. So if we go to the front page here, let me show you why. That's Eastman versus Thompson. Thompson is Benny Thompson, the chair of the committee. This is a case where they were seeking to get documents protected by privilege, according to Trump. They said it's not privilege because you were engaged in a crime. We're going to cover this morning because it walks you through all of the arguments. I have it highlighted when I get to the page. There it is right there. We're going to get to that this morning. But now let's go back to the article because we can get that later. And there it is. All right, get back to the article here. I literally right here, what I'm showing you, I pulled this, okay? I pulled this directly from Benny Thompson's own brief. All right, let's make sure they're not starting. Okay, they're not. I pulled that from Benny Thompson's brief right there. These are the claims that they're going to claim that they can prove that Trump committed a crime, right? All right, that Trump obstructed Congress's proceeding to count the electoral votes on January 6th in violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1512. That Trump, Eastman, and others, right, by interfering with the election certification process, exactly what Barbara Boxer did in 2004, right, in violation of Section 371. And Trump and his members of his campaign engaged in common law fraud. Now, even the Democrat-appointed Judge Carter that we're reading, that I showed you the opinion a moment ago, even he dismissed the third one. He did find, in the opinion, we debunked it. If you look up on either on our Substack page or on the Great American Mail, if you go, we've got that article. Where is it? Here it is right here. Live, no, Trump didn't commit a crime. That is 30 minutes. We'll walk you through great detail that opinion and why the judge is wrong. Okay. But anyway, that's what they're going to try to prove. If we see that this morning, we're ready for that. They're not going to be able to prove it. And in fact, let's get to the meat of the article here. Again, this is from the judge's March 28, 2022, Judge David O. Carter. If you want to read that opinion, sorry, folks, excuse me. If you want to read that opinion, just go to the article, GreatAmericanMail.substack.com. You can see it at the top and click right there, and it'll come up. Boom. If you want to read it yourself. We've got a little bit slightly different versions, dual column. Anyway, we break down. So let's go and find out what the law is, okay? So what does Section 18, 1512, what does it say? Let's take a look. Okay. The first alleged crime is obstruction of Congress proceeding to count the electoral votes on January 6th in violation of Section 1512. So I went and pulled, this is Section 18 U.S.C. Section 1512. There it is. The person obstructed, influenced, or impeded, or attempted to obstruct, influence, or impede. That's the same thing. You basically, in America, you couldn't be convicted of attempt. In America, there was no attempt. In British law, there was attempt. But in American common law, there was no attempt. That appears to be moving in the wrong direction and changing. I'm just trying to keep an eye on. I don't know why. It's now 1020, folks. This is absurd. Anyway, so an official proceeding in the United States and did so corruptly. Now, if you've seen our live stream or any of our videos on this, we can debunk it now with common sense, okay? We don't really need legal training, which I've had, or we don't really need to have gone to law school or taken a bar, any of that. We can debunk it with common sense. If you read this statute, it is so broad, right, that what the Democrats are going to do, and this is where you show trial, this is where leftism comes in. They're going to basically say, oh, well, you obstructed, influenced, or impeded, right, an official proceeding and did so corruptly. Because the way that David Carter, the judge, interprets that is if you somehow are intending to influence an action of an official proceeding, right, and he thinks that you may have had a corrupt state of mind, then you're guilty. Okay? That's not the way this works. The way this has always worked, forever and ever and ever, amen, was that you had to do so. Corruptly meant you had a mental state that was intentionally trying to corrupt it. Not just, I have a political theory that I'm going to run up the flagpole. And if I run my political theory up the flagpole, I'm not going to be committing a crime. And that's what you're going to see. You're going to see that basically Trump was following the law. He was following the Electoral Count Act of 1887, right? It may have been an aggressive interpretation. It may have been, right, sort of out there. It may have been taking Barbara Boxer to a greater level, although so far we haven't seen that. So far, what they were going to do is precisely what Barbara Boxer did in 2004, okay? And we could go back to 1960 where it happened, where when they were counting Hawaii votes, Hawaii sent 2 electors. So the idea of sending, in the election of 1876, many states sent dueling electors. This is not uncommon. Anyway, we go through it here, in great detail if you want to read the article. But again, just your common sense would tell you this can't be the case. It can't be that following the law is violating this, because then a person would be guilty of obstruction, influence, or impeding by merely going to a committee and protesting. Do you remember any people that protest outside of the Congress or lobby? Do you recall them being brought up on charges for Section 18 USC 1512? No, you don't. Of course you don't. But that's what leftism is. That's what show trials are. They basically take the law and they go, you're guilty of that. Well, no. I mean, how could I be guilty of that? Well, because the way we interpret it, our political enemies, we don't like them, so you tried to do it. Yeah, but if you interpret it that way, everybody did it. No, just the people we don't like. And that's essentially what it is, right? And if you go and read, and if we get time this morning, and it's looking kind of like we will, we can go through. In fact, let's do that. What the heck? I mean, we got time. It's the key part of what they're going to go through. So let's pull up Carter's decision. Here it is right here. So he lays it out. This is page 18. And by the way, the yellow is me. It's not Carter. In some instances, I have red on here. That's just to highlight it so you can see it. So potential crimes or fraud. So what he's saying is, Benny Thompson's committee said, hey, we want all of Eastman's documents. Eastman said, I can't give you those documents. They're to my client, Donald Trump, the president, and they're protected from discovery by the attorney-client privilege. Well, there's an exception. If you were committing a crime, then that's the crime fraud exception. So he's saying, what are the crimes? I just laid those out for you. I literally I didn't cut and paste, but I almost cut and paste them into the article. Then he says, okay, let's start with the first one, obstruction of official proceeding. Okay, he lays out, I just did it. I read you what section 1512. He does the same thing, right? There's the he goes, all right. Now he gets to what he did. Okay, he said, here's what you have to prove. Let's get into what he did. All right. Requires a specific thing. All right. President Trump attempted to obstruct an official proceeding by launching a pressure campaign. Folks, I'm right here. I'm right there. By launching a pressure campaign to convince Vice President Pence to disrupt the joint session on January 6th. Now, folks, that tells you where he's going. Okay. A pressure campaign? A pressure campaign. Do you think maybe calling a congressman and saying you need to vote this way or vote that way, you think that might be a pressure campaign? You think rioting outside of a Supreme Court justice, you think that might be a pressure campaign? You think going to Schumer's house might? Are we going to prosecute everybody now who engages in any kind of political discourse that we don't like? Yeah, spoiler alert. Yes, the Democrats are. This is exactly what they're doing. All right, so he's going to, again, folks, this is the evidence of the impeding. President Trump facilitated 2 meetings. I'm now here. 2 meetings in the days before January 6th that were explicitly tied to persuading Vice President Pence to disrupt the joint session. Again, not disrupt by giving Pence a bomb. Not disrupt by saying go in there with a gun and put it in people. That's what this statute is meant to design to do. You've got a bomb. You try to threaten somebody with violence. You bribe them with money. That'd be fine. They're saying now political discourse. Okay. All right, on January 1st, President Trump and Dr. Eastman, that's the same Eastman, right, that we're talking about here, hosted a meeting in the Oval Office with Vice President Pence, with Vice President's counsel Greg Jacob, and I think one of these gentlemen is going to appear this morning on behalf of Pence, I believe. Anyway, at the meeting, Dr. Eastman presented the plan to Vice President Pence, focused on either rejecting electors or delaying the count. Okay, so that's a little bit more evidence I'm right there where I've highlighted it. That's interesting. I've not really seen the rejecting electors thing. I think that's false. I think what they mean there is there's some disagreement. If you go and you pull up the Eastman memo, which we will, and again, I'll get a PDF for you. If you pull up the Eastman memo, there's some suggestion that the vice president, as presiding officer on January 6th, has some power to say, oh, I've got 2 electors from Pennsylvania. I've got 2 electors from Georgia. I've got 2 electors from Michigan, and so on, right? I think there were 6 or 7 states they had 2 electors from. That he has the power to go, you know what? Y'all need to go back to Pennsylvania, figure out which one of you is legit, and come back and see us. And by the way, you got until January 20th, because on the 20th, I'm going to kick it back over to the House, and they're going to vote. So I'm not really sure if Pence had that power or not. Okay, I'm again, sorry, folks. I just checking to see. They have not started. I'm not really sure what's going on here. Let me hold on a second. I'm sorry to do this, but let me just pull up and make sure they haven't started. I actually can do it here. Let's see when the commercial goes. Just make sure I'm not on the wrong feed. Yeah, if I'm on the wrong feed, nope, I'm not on the wrong feed. Sorry. All right, false alarm there. I'm not on the wrong feed. So no, they have not started yet. I don't know what in the world is going on. Still not in there. Okay, all right. So getting back to the article. So one is rejecting electors, the delaying the count. Again, they didn't need Pence for that. They had They had 8 senators. They had 139 Congress people. They had all the states lined up to, carry out the objections. And again, the Electoral Count Act of 1887 requires 2 hours minimum of debate time. So anyway, that's what he's focused on. Okay, so again, he summed it up best in his first sentence. We're still on the pressure campaign. All right. When Vice President Pence was unpersuaded, President Trump sent Dr. Eastman to review the plan in depth with the Vice President's counsel on January 5th. Vice President Pence's counsel interpreted Dr. Eastman's presentation on behalf of the president. Okay. On the morning of January 6th, President Trump, I'm now down here, folks. President Trump made several last-minute revised appeals to the vice president to pressure him into carrying out the plan. At 1 a.m., President Trump tweeted, "If Vice President Mike Pence comes through for us, we will win the presidency. Mike can send it back." Okay, it's his interpretation that he can send certain states' electors back. All right, again, it's a pressure campaign. Let's assume for the sake of the argument we agree it's a pressure campaign. And in all in fairness, it does appear to be a pressure campaign for an interpretation that maybe Pence doesn't buy. All right, Trump tweeted, "All Mike has to do is send them back to the states and we win. Do it, Mike. This is a time for extreme courage." Shortly thereafter, President Trump rang Vice President Pence and once again urged him to make the call and enact the plan. Just before the joint session of Congress began, President Trump gave a speech to a large crowd on the ellipse in which he warned, "And Mike Pence, I hope you're going to stand up for the good of our Constitution and for the good of our country. And if you're not, I'm going to be very disappointed in you. I will tell you right now." President Trump ended his speech by galvanizing the crowd to join him in enacting the plan. Let's walk down the Pennsylvania Avenue to give Vice President Pence and Congress the kind of pride and boldness they need to take back our country. All right. Together, these actions, more likely than not, constitute attempts to obstruct an official proceeding. Now, folks, he left out the fact that he said peacefully and patriotically, and he also left out the fact that he appears to believe that Trump wanted the violence. Well, the violence was not something Trump wanted because the violence absolutely ended this plan. All we've been talking to in these few paragraphs here, which, by the way, are the pressure campaign, right, all of it required peace and quiet on January 6th, and we didn't get it. So that's one of the problems that the January 6th committee has. The truth, right, has a way of getting in their way when they're trying to do this kind of thing, right? So you really can't have both. Now, if they'd been smart, which is what I urged them to do, if you go look at the first primer we did, they would just say, go with number one, hey, they were all there, they rioted, it's your fault. They wouldn't have been there without you. It's not legally a crime, but it, for political purposes, it's pretty good. And then go, this whole plan is a coup. Go with that, but then go, yeah, we admit that you didn't want the violence. We understand, but it did happen, because that really messes them up. But I want to make the point, let's scroll back up on this Eastman, right, to where we started, right? He said, President Trump attempted to obstruct an official proceeding by launching a pressure campaign to convince Mike Pence to disrupt the joint session of Congress on January 6th. So that's it. That's the entire part one of obstructing, impeding, or influencing. So you have to ask yourself at this point, as an American, all right, as an American, are you going to be guilty of obstructing an official congressional proceeding merely by engaging in a political pressure campaign? That's really what kind of country are we? Folks, that's banana republic. If this were going on in Colombia or Venezuela, we wouldn't be surprised. If this is going on in the United States of America, we should be very surprised and we should be shocked. So, and again, he does the same thing with the second part. Let me bring that up for you. So the second thing they said is, no. The second one is President Trump, Dr. Eastman, and several others, I'm reading right here, entered into an agreement to defraud the United States by interfering with the election certification process in violation of 18. But you know what? Let's do that. Let's go pull up 18 USC Section 371, just for giggles, see if it comes up. I'm going to have to take you over to Safari to do that. Well, my Lexus is trying to come up. Why is it not coming up? Well, we can, you know what? There's many ways to skin a cat here. 18 USC, Section 371. Boom, there it is. There it is right there. All right. Oh, I mean, we live in such a tremendous age. I mean, literally took me a couple of seconds to pull up that statute. I mean, just a couple of seconds. I mean, it's just a great. And it's funny, we're so advanced. That would have taken me, when I was in law school, I would have had to go over, I would have to go to the library. I would have had to pull up, go to the code. There's literally places where you can get the code. It starts with Section 1, U.S. Code. Book 1, U.S. Code, Section 1. And then Section 2, and then it gets to Book 2. We're now on Book 18, and we're all the way up to Section 371. If two or more persons conspire to commit any offense against the United States or to defraud the United States or any agency thereof in any manner or any purpose, one or more of such persons do any act to affect the object of the conspiracy, each shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 5 years or both. Okay, folks, that's void for vagueness. There's no way, but anyway, the court did find it. If we get time in a future live stream, I'm not going to do it today, we'll go back and we'll highlight we'll go back and highlight the court's opinion just for our purposes this morning. I highlighted and I went through, debunked the first one, right? But he does the same thing. It's basically, he doesn't come up with any new facts. So let's continue. So that only gets you part one. So that's where he's got the person. Let me highlight it. That's where he's gotten the person obstructed, influenced, or impeded, or attempted to obstruct, influence, or impede. Now, you've got to show it's an official proceeding. That one's kind of easy. I disagree that it's an official proceeding of the United States, but let's just set that aside. I think the Electoral College, you make a very good argument, is not an official proceeding of the United States, but let's set that aside. Okay, let's give him that one. He's got to say did so corruptly. So let's scroll down because he basically goes through as an official proceeding. He concludes that it is. Then he says corrupt intent. All right, so I am now here, corrupt intent. I'll highlight it for you. Here we go right here. Now, this is interesting, the little trick of the trade he does here. A person violates Section 1512C when they obstruct an official proceeding with a corrupt mindset. Now, as a person that is trained in the laws and interprets statutes, that's what I would assume. Did so corruptly, to me, would say, okay, did so corruptly means they had an intent to do something. They knew they were doing something nefarious or wrong. And let me explain to you how this works. The best example I can give you is, in other words, where you don't have to have a corrupt mindset, and I'm going to show you this, is so-called strict liability. So the best example I can give you of strict liability under law is statutory rape. Doesn't matter what your mental state was, it's completely irrelevant. If you look at your state, whatever the age of consent in your state is, it's probably 16 or 17 or thereabouts. If you have sex with a person who is under that age, it doesn't matter if you honestly believe they were 21. It doesn't matter if they told you they were 21. All they have to prove is you had sex with that person and they were under the age, and you're done. There's no mental element. There's no mens rea. Most crimes require mens rea, which means you have to prove the elements of the crime, then you have to prove the mental state, right? So here he says you have to have a corrupt mindset. But then notice how he does this. He goes, let me highlight. The Ninth Circuit has not defined corruptly for purposes of this statute. However, the court has made clear that the threshold for acting corruptly is lower than consciousness of wrongdoing, meaning a person does not need to know their actions are wrong to break the law. Now, he's not going to try to do that. I thought when I first read this opinion months back that he was going to go, oh, well, corruptly is, he's not saying it's strict liability, folks. He's not saying all I got to do is that you influenced, impeded, or obstructed, that it was an official proceeding, and I got you. I'm not quite saying strict liability, but I'm also not saying I have to show that you knew it was wrong. That's a neat little trick. All right, he's come up with this new category between strict liability, I proved the first two and you're guilty, and, well, he's saying it's very low, is what he's saying there, okay? He's saying they haven't defined corruptly for the statute, right? But they have said you don't have to know that you were wrong. But then he's going to go, but I think I can prove that you were wrong. But he does that he's smart, okay? That's a neat little trick. Anyway, because President Trump likely knew the plan to disrupt the electoral count was wrongful, his mindset exceeds the threshold for acting corruptly under Section 1512C. Now, this is interesting. So he's going to show us, according to him, why Trump knew that plan that we talked about a moment ago for our Substack article. He's going to prove how that plan, that Trump knew it was wrong. So let's, again, this is a dual column for my service. I get those things. They don't come in the way in which they're produced to the public. They have dual column, which is easier to read. Anyway, President Trump and Dr. Eastman justified the plan with allegations of fraud. But President Trump likely knew the justification was baseless and therefore that the entire plan was unlawful. So basically, if Trump goes through with this plan when he knew there was no fraud in the election, then it was a corrupt plan. Honestly, folks, if he could prove that, I might agree with him on this element of the claim. I've already made it clear I don't agree with him on the first element, right? They don't have any influence, obstruction, or impeding. They don't. And since they don't have any, he should just say, no, I conclude there was no crime here. If there's no crime here, you don't get any documents. I cannot believe these people are not here yet. Let me just double check. No, they're still not. This is unbelievable. I mean, this is Biden-esque. It really is. Anyway, all right. So, although Dr. Eastman argues that President Trump was advised several state elections were fraudulent, the Select Committee points to numerous executive branch officials who publicly stated and privately stressed to President Trump that there was no evidence of fraud. Now, folks, you start with your best. He's got clerks, and to clerk for a federal judge is an honor. You need to be, the top of your class, and that's the best they can come up with, is that some people told him that there was no evidence. Okay. That doesn't mean he didn't believe that they were correct. Or didn't believe that he did. It doesn't prove anything. By early January, more than 60 courts dismissed cases alleging fraud due to lack of standing or lack of evidence. All right, noting that they made strained legal arguments without merit and speculative accusations. I've read those, and again, this is a trick. Let me highlight what he's doing here. This is another trick. Let me continue to read it. And that there is, go down to the bottom, no evidence to support accusations of fraud. Okay, that is again a tell if you break down what you trace those footnotes. That's not true. What they say there, for example, in the Pennsylvania case, for example, and what was it? Well, there were several Pennsylvania cases, but the main Pennsylvania case that Trump brought, that again was kicked out on lack of standing grounds, was that Pennsylvania had mail-in balloting that the governor decided that they would have. They decided, hey, it hadn't been passed by statute, but we're going to go ahead and do it, and here you go. Everybody can vote by mail. Well, the Constitution provides that the legislature, which was controlled by Republicans at that time, controls how you vote in presidential elections. Well, what they had decided, and the law on the books, was that there was no mail-in balloting. So Trump sued and said all those votes that were cast by mail, they're improper votes, that they should not be counted. That was one of the things. At first, they kicked him out on standing grounds because they said didn't have standing to challenge it. And then B, they said, you're making strained legal arguments without merit and speculative accusations. And they said, how can we throw out, I think in that case it was probably hundreds of thousands of votes of people who voted, based on the procedures at the time. How can you do that? Okay. Well, it's not Trump's fault that Pennsylvania decided to engage in an illegal manner of voting. That's not his fault. And at the time, I said on Twitter, and I think if I had my podcast going then, I would have said it there too. I don't understand how we all have an agreement under the Constitution as to how we're going to conduct these elections. And then various states, most of which that had blue governors but had red legislatures, decided to just change the laws, to start to let people vote by mail, to put out ballot boxes, all these things. And then the president, whoever's running for president, and various other people don't have any standing to challenge that. I just don't understand that. But there's a whole line of people out there, scrolling down here to continue this, because I want to get through this if we can. Looks like the committee is going to come in here soon. But, I don't understand. I mean, if we can't challenge it, then how do we have an election? Which is to say, what if, for example, in 2024, Georgia were to say, you know what, we've decided we voted and the citizens voted, but we're going to get back, you have a back room, smoke a bunch of stogies, and we're going to send the electors we want. And those are the official electors of Georgia. And they do it all. They get the right people to sign the documents and send them there. Are you telling me that nobody has standing to challenge that? I don't understand what they're talking about. But anyway, what's clearly gone on since this, and Eastman versus Thompson is a good example of this, is that they're just basically anything you did to challenge Biden. Once Biden won the quote-unquote the AP called it for Biden. Anything you do to challenge it is a coup. But anyway, let's continue. President Trump's repeated pleas for Georgia's, and again, see, this shows how weak he is. So the first thing he's got is some people told him it wasn't true. Then he says, well, you lost some lawsuits, and you lost them on technical grounds, which, again, I've said this, and I probably should put an article up about this. To me, if I were representing the president at that time, I would have said, well, Mr. President, it sounds like the courts are telling you that this isn't the place to go challenge the fraud. Sounds like it's January 6th and the certification. In fact, we've got the Electoral Count Act of 1887 right here. Has a whole procedure. In fact, in 2004, Barbara Boxer, right, and Tubbs Jones, Democrats, they challenged George W. Bush, a Republican. So this sounds like the way to go, if you ask me. So it looks like they may be coming up. I don't know if they're coming up or not. Oh, come on, people. I can't believe. Well, we shall see if they're coming in there. No, so far I don't see anything. All right. Well, it looks like they might be. Let's see if I can get my feed. All right. Let's see. Let's go back to... We'll come back to this in a moment because he's now gone. He's gone from some people told him. He's gone to the courts kicked you out. And then he doesn't seem to have anything else. No, we're still... All right, let's continue. It looks like I thought they were coming in, but they're not. All right, so let's get back up the plane here. All right, President Trump's repeated pleas, I'm going to highlight what I'm talking about here. Repeated pleas for Georgia Secretary of State Rafflesberger clearly demonstrate that his justification was not just to investigate fraud, but to win the election. So what are we going to do, folks? I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break. I interpret that as I believe there was widespread fraud in Georgia. I only need 11,000. It's not like Pennsylvania where I need 50 or whatever. I don't see that as being nefarious, but apparently he does. Taken together, this evidence demonstrates that President Trump likely knew the electoral plan had no factual justification. So his three pieces of evidence are, to conclude what he just said, to conclude this, are some people told you there was no fraud in your own administration. So apparently you got to have unanimity. If one person says, I don't think there was fraud, then you're toast. The courts kicked you out and basically on procedural grounds telling you this is not the place to air this, right? And then, you called Rafflesberger and you said, hey, I think there's so much fraud down there, I only need 11,000 votes. Just go get the 11,000. It should take you a day. That's the three things he's got, right? Anyway, so he continues. The plan not only lacked factual basis, but also legal justification. So this is the famous Eastman memo. And again, this is a bombshell I'm about to walk you through. Bombshell, folks. Bombshell. This is nuts that he would do this and stick his chin out this big to be just knocked off. But anyway, the plan not only lacked factual basis, but also legal justification. Dr. Eastman's memo noted that the plan was, quote, bold certainly, right? The memo declared Dr. Eastman's intent to step outside the bounds of normal legal practice. We're no longer playing by the Queensberry's rules, all right? Now, why would he, well, let's do it this way. Let's go pull it up, right? So let's go back to Safari, and if we go to Safari, we go to the Great American Mail. We're going to find the Eastman memo. Again, if you go to this article, you can do this all for yourself. Now, I'm going to try to do this. If you scroll down, there's a way to get the document. Yeah, that's right. The original document PDF. Thank you. All right, there you go. All right. Boom, 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 boom. Here it is right here. That's the entire quote. Okay. Bold, certainly, right? We're no longer playing by the Queensberry's rules, therefore. That's what That's what the judge did, right? I just showed you. Now, what did he pull out? And again, this is a typical trickery by Democrats. And what I don't understand is how we've gotten as a society to where they do this. Anyway, but it reads, bold certainly, but this election was stolen by a strategic Democrat plan to systematically flout our election laws for partisan advantage. So basically, if you take that in context, it shows an innocent state of mind. All right, so let's go. Let's think the committee's coming in here. Yeah, here we go. All right, we're going to join the committee and do live commentary. Make sure I got the right one. I do. All right, here we go.
Had intimate feel and complete data perspective on all the numbers in all of the closely contested states.
And told the president
you
that
lost. And you're not going to win it back through legal challenges. Pursue them if you wish, Mr. President, but you lost. The numbers aren't there. They're not going to be there, and you should act accordingly.
We see the chairman, Benny Thompson, there taking this seat. John Dickerson, again, the effect of today's hearings.
The effect of today's hearings is that rules matter in government, in a presidency. You can't just break the rules and
That
say...
is so ironic. I mean, that is so ironic.
That matters not just to this story, but to the future. If you have a government that runs on people breaking the rules when they want to, you don't have a government.
The chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10, the chair announces the committee's approval to release the deposition material presented during today's hearing.
Oh, good.
Good morning. Last week, the Select Committee laid out a preview of our initial findings about the conspiracy overseen and directed by Donald Trump to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election and block the transfer of power, a scheme unprecedented in American history. My colleagues and I don't want to spend time talking about ourselves during these hearings, but as someone who's run for office a few times, I can tell you at the end of a campaign, it all comes down to the numbers. The numbers tell you the winner and the loser. For the most part, the numbers don't lie. But if something doesn't add up with the numbers, you go to court to get resolution. And that's the end of the line. We accept those results. That's what it means to...
Now, folks, oh, come on.
...democracy. Because those numbers aren't just numbers, they're votes. They're your votes. They are the will and the voice of the people. And the very least we should expect from any person seeking a position of public trust is the acceptance of the will of the people, win or lose. Donald Trump didn't. He didn't have...
I don't know why it's not stopping, but I'll join back real quick. Why do you have electoral college then? There's no electoral college for Congress and any other election out there, folks. That's the big problem he's got there. And again, he said he wasn't going to talk about himself, and he does.
He lied to his supporters and the country, and he tried to remain in office after the people had voted him out, and the courts upheld the will of the people. This morning, we'll tell the story of how Donald Trump lost an election and knew he lost an election, and as a result of his loss, decided to wage an attack on our democracy, an attack on the American people by trying to rob you of your voice in our democracy, and in doing so, lit the fuse that led to the horrific violence of January 6th, when a mob of his supporters stormed the Capitol sent by Donald Trump to stop the transfer of power. Today, my colleague from California, Ms. Lofgren, and our witnesses will detail the Select Committee's findings on these matters. But first, I will recognize our distinguished Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, for any opening statement she'd care to offer.
Yeah, I got to try to find another feed because I can't stop this feed.
Last week...
Yeah, see, it's not stopping it.
Today, we will begin looking at the initial part of that plan. President Trump's effort to convince millions of Americans that the election was stolen from him by overwhelming fraud. A federal court has already reviewed elements of the committee's evidence on this point and said this, quote, "In the months following the election, numerous credible sources from the president's inner circle to agency leadership and statisticians informed President Trump and Dr. Eastman that there was no evidence of election fraud," close quote.
That's going to be David Carter. We've been through that.
To overturn the 2020 presidential election. The court's opinion methodically documents each of the principal reasons for that conclusion, and I would urge all those watching to read it. Today, we will begin to show the American people some of our evidence. Today, you will hear much more from former Attorney General Bill Barr's recorded testimony.
If we can get it here.
And you will hear in greater detail what others in the department told President Trump, that his claims of election fraud were...
All right, let me stop this one.
You will also hear... Let me focus briefly on just 3 points now.
All right, let me just kill it.
You will hear firsthand testimony that the president's campaign advisors urged him to await the counting of votes and not to declare victory on election night.
Oh, that's
The
new.
president
Okay.
understood even before the election
Wow.
that many more Biden voters had voted by mail because President Trump ignored the advice of his campaign experts and told his supporters only to vote in person.
This is
Donald
new.
Trump knew
That's
before the
new. That's a
election
bombshell.
that the counting of those mail-in ballots in several states would not begin until late in the day and would not be complete for multiple days.
Now, that's not true about all states. Florida and some other states, they got them counted. But in some states, that doesn't happen. I should tell you something. This is new, folks. I've not seen this argument presented out there before, that he, by declaring himself victor, even though there were votes to count. This is interesting.
This was expected, reported, and widely known. You will also hear testimony that President Trump rejected the advice of his campaign experts on election night and instead followed the course recommended by an apparently inebriated Rudy Giuliani to just claim he won and insist that the vote counting stop, to falsely claim everything was fraudulent. He falsely told the American people that the election was not legitimate. In his words, quote, a major fraud. Millions of Americans believed him. Second, pay attention to what Donald Trump and his legal team said repeatedly about Dominion voting machines. Far-flung conspiracies with a deceased Venezuelan communist allegedly pulling the strings. This was...
Now, again, this is where Trump's going to have some weakness because he had that team of the Kraken and Giuliani making all these claims that now appear to have been debunked about Dominion. And, that, again, they've got him here.
Quote, complete nonsense, as Bill Barr said. President Trump's own campaign advisors, his Department of Justice, and his cybersecurity experts all told him the same thing. Here, for example, is White House lawyer Eric Hirschman. His view was shared by many of the Trump team whom we interviewed.
I thought the Dominion stuff I never saw any evidence whatsoever to sustain those allegations.
And third, as Mike Pence's staff started to get a sense for what Donald Trump had planned for January 6th, they called the campaign experts to give them a briefing on election fraud and all the other election claims. On January 2nd, the general counsel of the Trump campaign, Matthew Morgan, this is the campaign's chief lawyer, summarized what the campaign had concluded weeks earlier, that none of the arguments about fraud or anything else could actually change the outcome of the election.
Generally discussed on that topic was whether the fraud, maladministration, abuse, or irregularities, if aggregated and read most favorably to the campaign, would that be outcome determinative? And I think everyone's assessment in the room, at least amongst the staff, Mark Short, myself, and Greg Jacob, was that it was not sufficient to be outcome determinative.
As is obvious.
Now, again, this is back to the weaknesses they have. Okay, so you had some people, there was disagreement in the White House. That's what they're going to be able to prove. Now, that doesn't prove anything. Okay, he decided to go with the ones that agreed with him. Not a surprise, not a shock.
This was before the attack on the Capitol. The Trump campaign legal team knew there was no legitimate argument, fraud, irregularities, or anything to overturn the election. And yet President Trump went ahead with his plans for January 6th anyway. Mr. Chairman, hundreds of our countrymen have faced criminal charges. Many are serving criminal sentences because they believed what Donald Trump said about the election, and they acted on it. They came to Washington, D.C. at his request. They marched on the Capitol at his request. And hundreds of them besieged and invaded the building at the heart of our constitutional republic. As one conservative editorial board put it recently, quote, Mr. Trump betrayed his supporters by conning them on January 6th, and he is still doing it. Another conservative editorial board that has long supported President Trump said last week, Donald Trump, quote, won't stop insisting that 2020 was stolen, even though he has offered no proof that that is true. And this, Donald Trump now, quote, clings to more fantastical theories, such as Dinesh D'Souza's debunked 2000
Oh
mules,
boy. Oh boy.
even as recounts in
Hasn't been
Arizona,
debunked.
Georgia, and
Wow.
Wisconsin confirm Trump lost. Those are the correct conclusions to draw from the evidence gathered by this committee. We have much more evidence to show the American people on this point than we can reasonably show in one hearing. But today, we will begin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Wow. Okay, no, they're not going to have much.
Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In our opening hearing, we gave an overview of our investigation into the January 6th attack. The plot to overthrow the election was complex and had many parts, which we'll explore in remaining hearings. But today, we examine the false narrative that the 2020 election was, quote, stolen. Former President Trump's plan to overturn the election relied on a sustained effort to deceive millions of Americans with knowingly false claims of election fraud. All elements of the plot relied on convincing his supporters about these false claims. Today, we'll demonstrate the 2020 election was not stolen. The American people elected President Joe Biden. We'll present evidence that Mr. Trump's claims of election fraud were false, that he and his closest advisors knew those claims were false, but they continued to peddle them anyway, right up until the moments before a mob of Trump supporters attacked the Capitol. We'll also show that the Trump campaign used these false claims of election fraud to raise hundreds of millions of dollars from supporters who were told their donations were for the legal fight in the courts. But the Trump campaign didn't use the money for that. The big lie was also a big ripoff. The former president laid the groundwork for these false claims well in advance of the election. As early as April 2020, Mr. Trump claimed that the only way he could lose an election would be as a result of fraud.
You know the things with bundling and all of the things that are happening with votes by mail, where thousands of votes are gathered, and I'm not going to say which party does it, but thousands of votes are gathered and they come in and they're dumped in a location, and then all of a sudden you lose elections that you think you're going to win.
The only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. Remember that. It's the only way we're going to lose this election.
This is going to be a fraud like you've never seen. Did you see what's going on? Take a look at West Virginia, mailmen selling the ballots. They're being sold. They're being dumped in rivers. This is a horrible thing for our country. This is not going to end well.
Mr. Trump decided even before the election that regardless of the facts and the truth, if he lost the election, he would claim it was rigged. Mr. Trump was right about one thing. It did not end well. On election night, Mr. Trump claimed even before the votes were counted that his loss was a result of fraud. Now, Thursday, we had testimony from Attorney General Barr about the Department of Justice investigation of Mr. Trump's fraud claims. Barr told Trump directly that his claims were BS. Yet, after hearing the truth and that warning from the AG, Mr. Trump continued to peddle the false claims of fraud. You'll hear detailed testimony from Attorney General Barr describing the various elections.
Now, I don't want to interrupt this too much, but one thing that they've done here that's a mistake is, again, they don't need to be talking. More evidence, less talking. Number two, she's now claimed that she's going to prove the election there was no fraud. That's a huge matzo ball to try to swallow, folks. I don't think they're going to be able to do that. That was a mistake.
Fraud claims the Department of Justice investigated. He'll tell you how he told Mr. Trump repeatedly that there was no merit to those claims. Mr. Barr will tell us that Mr. Trump's election night claims of fraud were made without regard to the truth and before it was even possible to look for evidence of fraud. Attorney General Barr wasn't alone. You'll see and hear today other Department of Justice officials and senior advisors to Mr. Trump that they told him the claims he was making were not supported by evidence. The election fraud claims were false. Mr. Trump's closest advisors knew it. Mr. Trump knew it. That didn't stop him from pushing the false claims and urging his supporters to...
That's a mistake. They should go with what we saw Carter do, like that he more likely than not knew. The whole he knew, this is just they're pushing too far here.
Fight like hell to, quote, take back their country. After he lost the election, various legal challenges were made. You'll hear testimony today from a renowned Republican election litigation lawyer who will explain the normal process by which candidates challenge an election. Rather than accept the results of the election and the decisions of the courts, Mr. Trump pursued a different strategy. He tried to convince the American people the election had been stolen. Many of his supporters believed him, and many still believe him today. The attack on January 6th was a direct and predictable result of Mr. Trump's decision to use false claims of election fraud to overturn the election and to cling to power. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Not very effective. Just
Thank you
more
very
of the same.
much.
We already know all that.
I now welcome our first witness. We're joined today by former Fox News politics editor Chris Stilwell. Bill Stepien, President Trump's former campaign manager, was subpoenaed to be here and was in Washington this morning, prepared to testify. Kevin Marino, Mr. Stepien's attorney, is here with us today. Thank you, Mr. Marino, for coming. And he has advised us that Mr. Stepien's wife went into labor this morning. Mr. Stepien unexpectedly had to travel to be with his wife, and we wish him the best. Due to the depth and rigor of our investigation, we have several hours of Mr. Stepien's testimony from when we interviewed him in February, and we will be presenting that testimony today.
That probably explains the delay.
I'll now swear in our witness.
They had to cut the
witness will please stand
testimony.
and raise his
I
right
don't know why
hand.
they just didn't start and then come out later, but
Do you swear or affirm on the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect the witness answered in the affirmative. I now recognize myself for questions. I want to start by showing a video that tells the story of what was going on in the Trump White House on election night in November of 2020.
Do you remember where you were on the night of the election, November the 3rd?
I was at the White House.
You know where specifically over the course of that night you spent your time within the White House?
There was an event that was organized in the residence, so I moved between the residence, a room sort of off the residence where some family members were.
I take it the president was upstairs in the residence.
He was upstairs. We were kind of on the first floor, so not upstairs. With mostly with Ivanka and her brothers and a couple other people who'd be coming in and out.
Can you just describe the atmosphere? What were people expecting that night when you got to the White House?
I think that there was, typically for people who show up there on election night, it's going to be a self-select, more positive environment. I think people were a little bit nervous, not knowing what was going to happen with the red wave or the red mirage as the debate was being carried out.
The Fox News Decision Desk is calling Arizona for Joe Biden. That is a big get for the Biden campaign.
Arizona's called. Do you remember that?
I do.
What do you remember happening where you were when Arizona was called?
There was surprise at the call.
Who was surprised?
Most everyone in the room.
Were you being one of them?
Yes.
Did that shift the atmosphere or the attitude in the White House?
Completely.
How so? Can you describe that?
Because Fox News was the first one to go out and say that.
So is it anger kind of directed towards Fox News for making a call more so than like disappointment that maybe the campaign lost Arizona?
All the above.
So both anger and disappointment.
Both disappointed with Fox and concerned that maybe our data or our numbers weren't accurate.
Were you in the White House residence during the sort of past midnight into the early morning hours of November 4th?
Yes, oh sure, it went over beyond midnight, yes.
Do you remember Rudy Giuliani being at the White House on election night and into the early hours the next morning?
I do.
What do you remember about when he came?
He was, I had heard that he was upstairs, in that aforementioned reception area. And he was looking to talk to the president. And it was suggested instead that he come talk to several of us down off the map room.
You said that you had heard that Mr. Giuliani wanted to talk to the president and then he was directed your way. Did you end up talking to Mr. Giuliani when he was directed your way?
I did.
What was that conversation?
A lot of conversations were directed my way. A few of us, myself, Jason Miller, Justin Clark, and Mark Meadows, gathered in a room off the map room to listen to whatever Rudy presumably wanted to say to the president.
Was there anyone in that conversation who, in your observation, had too much to drink?
Talk about a smear. Good gracious.
Mayor Giuliani.
Tell me more about that. What was your observation about his potential intoxication during that discussion about what the president should say when he's addressed the nation on election night?
Folks, smears like this rarely
was
influence the way they think they
definitely
will.
intoxicated, but I do not,
This is silly.
know his level of intoxication when he spoke with the president, for example.
Were you part of any discussions with the people I mentioned, Mr. Steffi and Mr. Meadows, or anyone else, about whether the president should make any sort of speech on election night?
I mean, I spoke to the president. They may have been present, but President spoke to the president several times that night.
There were suggestions by, I believe it was Mayor Giuliani, to go and declare victory and say that we won it outright.
It was far too early to be making any calls like that. Ballots were still being counted. Ballots were still going to be counted for days. And it was far too early to be making any proclamation like that.
I remember saying that, to the best of my memory, I was saying that we should not go and declare victory until we had a better sense of the numbers.
Okay, can you be more specific about that conversation, in particular what Mayor Giuliani said, your response, and then anybody else in the room's response?
I think effectively Mayor Giuliani was saying, we won it. They're stealing it from us. Where'd all the votes come from? We need to go say that we won. And essentially that anyone who didn't agree with that position was being weak.
What was your view at the time as to what he should or shouldn't say?
I don't know that I had a firm view as to what he should say in that circumstance. The results were still being counted. It was becoming clear that the race would not be called on election night.
My belief, my recommendation was to say that votes were still being counted. It's too early to tell, too early to call the race, but we proud of the race we ran, and we think we're in good position And we'll have more to say about this, the next day or the next day, whenever we had something to say.
And did anybody who was a part of that conversation disagree with your message?
Yes.
Who was that?
The president disagreed with that. I don't recall the particular words. He thought I was wrong. He told me so. And, that they were going to, go he was going to go in a different direction.
It's a mistake to play that
This is a
testimony.
fraud
That's a mistake.
on the American
Big
public.
mistake by the committee there. They should not have done
This is
that.
an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We did win this election.
Mr. Steinwalt, did President Trump have any basis to declare victory on November 4th, 2020? Thank you. Mr. Stepien also testified that President Trump had no basis for declaring victory at that point in time.
I'm waiting for video.
My recommendation was to say that votes were still being counted. It's too early to tell, too early to call the race, but we proud of the race we ran, and we think we're in good position, and we'll have more to say about this, the next day or the next day, whenever we had something to say.
Thank you. Mr. Steinwalt, after the votes were counted, who won the presidential election of 2020?
Another bad question.
Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. of the great state of Delaware.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. We've had an election. Mr. Trump lost, but he refused to accept the results of the democratic process.
But he had a reason. I mean,
pursuant to Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, I now recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for questions.
Well,
an awful question by
thank
Thompson
you,
there.
Mr. Chairman.
So one
Mr.
person
Steinwalt,
believes that. What does that
I'd like
prove?
you to explain a term that was thrown around a lot during the election, and that's the so-called red mirage. What does that mean?
So in the 40 or 50 years, let's say, that Americans have increasingly chosen to vote by mail or early or absentee, Democrats prefer that method of voting more than Republicans do. So basically, in every election, Republicans win election day and Democrats win the early vote.
Not so
Then
much
you
anymore,
wait
by the
and
way.
start counting, and it depends on which ones you count first, but usually it's election day votes that get counted first. And you see the Republicans shoot ahead, and then the process of bailing and binding and unbinding all those mail-in votes. And some states like Pennsylvania refuse to count the votes first, so you have to wait for all of that to come in. So in every election, and certainly a national election, you expect to see the Republican with a lead, but it's not really a lead. When you put together a jigsaw puzzle, it doesn't matter which piece you put in first, it ends up with the same image. So for us, who cares? But that's because no candidate had ever tried to avail themselves of this quirk in the election counting system. We had gone to pains, and I'm proud of the pains we went to make sure that we were informing viewers that this was going to happen, because the Trump campaign and the president had made it clear that they were going to try to exploit this anomaly. And we knew it was going to be bigger because the percentage of early votes was higher, right? We went from about 45% of the votes being early and absentee to, because of the pandemic, that increased by about 50%. So we knew it would be longer, we knew it would be more. So we wanted to keep telling viewers, hey, look, the number that you see here is sort of irrelevant because it's only a small percentage of these votes.
So this red mirage, that's really what you expected to happen on election.
So let me stop here, because this is a good part to break this down. That's not true, what he just said. None of that's true. This is all self-serving testimony. And there's a couple things that anybody that's an election night watcher, which I am, one of the things that basically what he said there is mostly true. Here's a couple things you understand, though, about why it isn't true. First and foremost, It's not true because we all know that typically urban areas report first. So we also know there's a factor out there if you're following elections, say you're looking at North Carolina or Ohio or even Florida. Democrats usually surge to a lead because those Democrat urban areas have electronic counting systems and they report early. Now, that didn't happen this year in 2020. Didn't happen. That was another unusual thing that was different. So what he's talking about, this red mirage nonsense in Election Day voting, here's the other thing you need to understand. Again, I hate when people just lie to people like this, and is that based on which counties are reporting. So they could have seen what was coming in and done a second analysis if you wanted, going, oh, well, this is from Atlanta. That's from Cobb County. These are all Biden places and where the votes are coming from. So this whole thing is just a misleading right here.
Happens every time.
Thank you, Mr. Steyerwalt. Now, I'd like to play
This guy's obviously a
clip of
never Trumper.
Attorney General Bill Barr, who also explains what was expected to happen on election night.
Right out of the box on election night, the president claimed that there was major fraud underway. I mean, this happened, as far as I could tell, before there was actually any potential of looking at evidence. And it seemed to be based on the dynamic that at the end of the evening, a lot of Democratic votes came in, which changed the vote counts in certain states. And that seemed to be the basis for this broad claim that there was major fraud. And I didn't think much of that because people had been talking for weeks and everyone understood for weeks that that was going to be what happened on election night.
Mr. Stepien obviously could not be with us today, and it's proper for him to be with his wife as they welcome their child. But he also had discussions with the president about the red mirage. That is, that it would be a long night and that early votes would favor him, but that lots more votes would be counted over the course of the night and the days after. So let's play clip 1 from our interview with Mr. Stepien.
I recounted back to that conversation with him, in which I said, just like I said in 2016, it was going to be a long night. I told him in 2020 that it was going to be a process again, as the early returns are going to be positive, and we're going to be watching the returns of ballots as they rolled in thereafter.
So is it fair to say you're trying to present what you thought would be a realistic picture of what might happen over the course of that night, being election night?
That night and the days that followed. Yeah, I always told the president the truth, and I think he expected that from me, and I told him it was going to be a process. It was going to be, we're going to have to wait and see how this turned out. So I just like I did in 2016, I did the same thing in 2020.
So let's watch a short clip of President Trump speaking after he received that information from his campaign advisors.
We want all voting to stop. We don't want them to find any ballots at 4 o'clock in the morning and add them to the list.
So when former President Trump said that, it contradicted what his advisors had warned would happen. We all know that mail-in ballots played an important role in the 2020 election. However, President Trump continuously discouraged...
Okay, folks, first and foremost, that's not what he's talking about. Fine ballots, that's not... He's talking about fraud. Number 2, most states required that they be received or at least stamped by Election Day. Part of the problem with the election is some states either didn't require that stamp and were allowing ballots to be counted if they came in weeks later. But anyway, this is what this committee has done now. The second day of doing this, they're reaching. You don't need to reach when you have the truth, folks. You just let the truth. You just set the. You got the. The 10 of spades, the jack of spades, the queen of spades, the king of spades. You got the ace. You just hold it and you just put them down one by one. They're not doing that. They're reaching.
Mail-in voting. Mr. Stepien was so concerned about the president's position on mail-in voting that in the summer of 2020, He met with President Trump along with House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. Let's play clip 4.
Meeting that was had, in particular, I invited Kevin McCarthy to join the meeting, he being of like mind on the issue with me, in which we made our case for why we believed mail-in voting, not to be a bad thing for his campaign. But the president's mind was made up, and he understands, how many times to, go to the well on a particular topic.
Yeah, I understand. Tell me a little bit more about the argument that you and Mr. McCarthy made to the president in that meeting as to why it wasn't a bad thing that mail-in voting was available.
Largely two pillars to that argument, both of which I've previously mentioned. One, leaving a good deal to chance, pushing or urging your voters to vote only on election day leaves a lot to chance. That's A. And B, also previously mentioned, the fact that the Trump campaign, Republican National Committee, the Republican Party had an advantage of grassroots workers and volunteers on the ground that would allow, an advantage to enhance return rates of ballots that were mailed. Those were the two pillars of the argument.
I see. And what, if anything, do you recall Representative McCarthy saying during that meeting?
We were echoing the same argument. I mean, his words echoed mine, and vice versa on those two topics.
Mr. Stirewalt, you were at the decision desk at Fox News on election night, and you called Arizona early for President Biden.
Oh, that's why he's here. He's here to.
How did you make that call, and where did you think the race stood in the early hours of the next day?
Well, it was really controversial to our competitors who we beat so badly by making the correct call first. Our decision desk was the best in the business, and I was very proud to be a part of it.
Oh, wow.
Because we had partnered with the Associated Press and the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago, thanks to my colleague and friend Arnon Mishkin, had built a wonderful device for forecasting the outcomes of elections. So we had a different set of data than our competitors did. We had more research, and we had a better system, and we had a great team. So what you're waiting to see is, do the actual votes match up with the expectations in the poll? The real votes are testing the quality of your poll in targeted precincts and in targeted places. And let me tell you, our poll in Arizona was beautiful. And it was doing
This guy,
just
what a
we
clown
wanted
this guy
it to
is.
do, and it was cooking up just right. And at some point, and I forget exactly who, but at some point it became clear that Arizona was getting ready to make a call. So we my boss, Bill Salmon, said we're not making any call until everybody says yes, because that was always our policy, unanimity. And you have to understand, or in this room, you have, the best people from academia, Democrats, Republicans, a broad cross-section of people who had worked together for a decade, who are really serious about this stuff. So we knew it would be a consequential call because it was one of 5 states that really mattered, right? Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona were the ones that we were watching. We knew it would be significant to call any one of those 5, but we already knew Trump's chances were very small and getting smaller based on what we had seen. So we were able to make the call early. We were able to beat the competition. We looked around the room, everybody says yay, and on we go. And by the time we found out,
I think this guy's advertising for another job here.
Out and losing their minds over this call, we were already trying to call the next state. We had already moved on. We were to Georgia. We were to North Carolina. We were looking at these other states. So we thought we were pleased, but not surprised.
I see. After the election, as of November 7th, in your judgment, what were the chances of President Trump winning the election?
After that point?
Yes.
None. I mean, I guess it's always possible that you could have, a truckload of ballots be found somewhere, I suppose. But once you get into this space, ahead of today, I thought about what are the largest margins that could ever be overturned by a recount, and the kind of stuff that we heard Mike Pence talking about, sounding like a normal Republican that night when he said, we'll keep every challenge. Nothing like that. In a recount, you're talking about hundreds of votes. When we think about calling a race, one of the things that we would think about is it outside the margin of a recount? And when we think about that margin, we think about, in modern history, you're talking about 1,000 votes.
Folks, right here, I'm going to stop it. He's basically, right there, he doesn't believe in fraud. He doesn't think there's any kind of fraud at all. He doesn't think votes can be, basically, recounts are nothing. It's just you count the votes to make sure the machine got it right. You hear this, right? This is a guy, is a complete never-Trumper. He's always been in. This is what a show trial is. Somebody who's already against you, searching for his next job, comes in and basically rats out your political opponents. What a joke.
1,500 votes at the way, way outside. Normally, you're talking about hundreds of votes, maybe 300 votes that are going to change. So the idea that through any normal process in any of these states, remember, he had to do it thrice, right? He needed 3 of these states to change. And in order to do that, I mean, you're at an infant. You're better off to play the Powerball than to have that come in.
Oh, ha, ha, ha,
November
this is
7th,
funny.
The other major news outlets called the race for President Biden. Now, Mr. Stepien told the committee that he thought the odds were, and this is a quote, very, very, very bleak, and held a meeting with the president that same day. Let's show clip 8, video clip 8.
I mean, with each day that wore on, I mean, the trajectory of the race, on election night, Trump ahead in many states. And as that week wore on, as the 3rd became the 4th, became the 5th, and so on and so forth, and the vote by mail ballots were tabulated, Trump's lead, grew more narrow, and in some places, Biden surpassed, Trump in the vote totals. So as the week wore on, as we paid attention to those numbers multiple times a day, internally, I was feeling less confident for sure.
What was your view on the state of the election at that point?
Very, very, very bleak. We told him, the group that went over there outlined, my belief in chances for success at this point, and then we pegged it at 5, maybe 10% based on recounts that either were automatically initiated or could be initiated based on realistic legal challenges, not all the legal challenges that eventually were pursued. But it was my belief is that it was a very, very 5 to 10%. It's not a very good optimistic outlook.
Now, as President Trump and others continued to claim that the election was stolen, there were lawyers who were a part of the campaign lawyers, who were responsible for investigating the fraud claims. That includes Alex Cannon, who could not validate the claims that were being made, including those being made by the president. Let's roll video 13.
This is an email. It's 2 emails, actually. The first is from Alex Cannon to you and Faith McPherson. And then you forward that email on to Mark Meadows, Justin Clark, and Jason Miller, the subject being AZ Federal ID voters. If you look at the original email there, it says, Bill, we completed the AZ analysis you requested. I assume that's about Arizona. And because of the substantial uncertainty surrounding the databases, this is a highly unreliable way to identify ineligible voters. Can you explain the task that you gave to Ms. Cannon for this Arizona analysis?
Sure. Previously, I described some of my frustration with some of the claims that people would throw at President Trump regarding, need to look at this, this happened in this state or that happened in that state. And it would be, those would flow to us to look into. I talked about that before, I think.
Yep.
This is an example of that. I recall in Arizona, someone had thrown out, I believe this to be the claim, that there were thousands of illegal citizens, people not eligible to vote, having cast their ballots in Arizona. Someone had thrown out that claim to President Trump. And with, the margins being as close as they were, as I previously described, that could potentially matter. So this wild claim is thrown out, which, on its face didn't seem, realistic or possible to me. I asked Alex to look at the claim, and I haven't read this full email, but I recall the response to that. The reality of that was not illegal citizens voting in the election. I think it was like overseas voters voting in the election. So obviously, people who were eligible to vote.
When these findings were passed up the chain to President Trump, he became frustrated and he replaced the campaign's legal team. Let's play clip 14.
I really don't understand what this is proving.
I think the president, it was during the second week where things like you displayed were occurring, where he was, growing increasingly unhappy with, his team, me less so because I was less involved at this point, but still me, growing increasingly unhappy with Justin Clark, and that kind of, paved the way for, Justin to be moved out and Mayor Giuliani to be moved in as the person in charge of, the legal side of the campaign and, for all intents and purposes, the campaign at that point.
Now, when Mr. Stepien became campaign manager, he was the second Trump campaign manager for the 2020 race, and there were only about 115 days until Election Day. So let's play the video.
I inherited a campaign that was, the day I was hired was, I believe, President Trump's low point in the 2020 daily average polling against President Biden. It was a campaign at a low point in the polls. It was structurally and fiscally deficient. There was a great deal wrong with the campaign in both of those areas. So most of my day spent fixing and I think I took over with 115 days left in the campaign. Most of my time spent fixing the things that could be fixed with 115 days left in the campaign.
Now, again, that was a rookie error. Basically, what they're trying to show is that, hey, we're going to prove Trump lost. The reason he lost is because he had a campaign that was in disarray. This witness just told you that. Well, that also shows to me, and again, if you had somebody in these hearings when they're doing them secretly to ask these questions or to point other things out, they would be aware of this. But the January 6th has no committee, has no idea. Here's what I heard. What I heard is this guy has to have a reason to explain why he lost, if he lost. So he's going, hey, it wasn't my fault. I came in, it was in disarray. If anything, I gave you a fighting chance, right? And I'm here to testify to all this so I can get another job and show that I did a good job. So to me, you just gave me the motivation for his testimony. Not helpful.
Mr. Stepien has been in the campaign field for a long time, and he worked for lots of different candidates in campaigns. He testified to this committee about his concerns given the claims that Mr. Giuliani and Ms. Powell and their team were making publicly. Let's play clip 15.
Okay, and was it important for you, Mr. Stepien, to sort of pull back just for your own professional reputation. You didn't want to be associated with some of what
Boom.
you were hearing from the Giuliani team and others
Wow.
that
You're
going
going to ask the guy this?
Of your departure?
I didn't mind being categorized. There were two groups of we called them kind of my team and Rudy's team. I didn't mind being characterized as being part of Team Normal, as reporters, kind of started to do around that point in time.
Wow.
I said, hours ago, early on that, I've been doing this for a long time, 25 years, and I've spanned, political ideologies from Trump to McCain to Bush to Christie, and, I could work under a lot of circumstances for a lot of varied.
Helping Trump here. This is not helpful testimony.
Situation where, and I think along the way I've built up a pretty good, I hope, a good reputation.
Now he's interviewing for a job.
And professional. And I didn't think what was happening was necessarily honest or professional at that point in time.
Wow. So there you go.
That led to me stepping away.
This is all unforced errors here, folks. Been better off not that not coming out.
The president did get rid of Team Normal, and I'd like to play a clip showing that the president found the people he needed to perpetuate his claims of fraud.
They saw a big truck bringing in 100,000 ballots in garbage cans, in waste paper baskets, in cardboard boxes, and in shopping baskets. And every single one of them was for Biden because they were being notified by Smartmatic in Frankfurt that Biden was way behind and they better come up with a lot more ballots. And we can prove every single thing I just said. If you gave me the paper ballots, I could probably turn around each one of these states. I'm absolutely convinced if you let me examine each one of those ballots, I'd pull out enough that were fraudulent that it would shake the hell out of the country.
It can set and run an algorithm that probably ran all over the country to take a certain percentage of votes from President Trump and flip them to President Biden, which we might never have uncovered had the votes for President Trump not been so overwhelming in so many of these states that it broke the algorithm.
I remember that one of the things Mark said at some point was, you can't show an actual vote was flipped, which I found at the time to be a remarkable assertion because you don't have to have the gun to see the body lying on the floor bleeding out with 5 bullet holes in it was killed by a gun.
What they were proposing, I thought was nuts. And the theory was also completely nuts, right? I mean, it was a combination of Italians, the Germans. I mean, different things have been floating around as to who was involved. I remember Hugo Chavez in the Venezuelan. She has an affidavit from somebody who says they wrote a software in and something with the Philippines and that. Just all over the radar.
Did you ever share, Mr. Kushner, your view of Mr. Giuliani? Did you ever share your perspective about him with the president?
I guess, yes.
Tell me what you said.
Basically, not the approach I would take if I was you.
Okay. And how did he react? How did President Trump react when you shared that view with him?
We said, I have confidence in Rudy.
I think I had conversations with probably all of our council who are signed up to assist on election day as they disengaged with the campaign. The general consensus was that the law firms were not comfortable making the arguments that Rudy Giuliani was making publicly.
Folks, this stuff is all pretty powerful, and I think this is where Trump made a mistake, going for the big and the bold claims of fraud, which he didn't need to do. If he'd have gone with the 2,000 mules type of stuff, or with the election integrity issues where people were changing the way you voted right up until election day, that would have been much stronger. The committee is scoring some points here, folks. This is hurting Trump badly here. Ultimately, don't think it'll make a difference, but
most all of them.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bullshit. And,
You're going to hear this. That's the second time they've played that clip. They're going to play it every chance they get.
The reasons that went into me deciding to leave when I did.
Even Sidney Powell, defending herself in a defamation lawsuit brought by Dominion Voting Systems, argued that, quote, no reasonable person would conclude that her statements were truly statements of fact. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the witness for joining us today. The first panel is now dismissed.
Probably going to go into research here. So while they're doing that, all you saw there until the very end about the Rudy Giuliani, which I think they scored some points there. The stuff about this campaign manager and that campaign manager and different people weren't comfortable. They didn't say anything.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren.
Here she goes again. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, we presented the testimony of former Attorney General Bill Barr, who testified before this committee. Today, we present additional evidence, including his testimony that former President Trump started making claims of election fraud immediately after the election, and that
he was making them before the election, too.
Untrue. Now, due to the length of Attorney General Barr's testimony, we're only going to include relevant portions at the hearing today. So let's play the video.
All right, folks, it's important to keep this in mind. That's all they're doing. They've got a mountain of stuff. Let's say they got 10,000, or it's more than that, probably 100,000, but maybe it's to me. It doesn't matter. Sitting behind there. They're only pulling back and reaching, grabbing one or two and saying, look at this. And this is all their best stuff. I mean, come on. But anyway.
The department, in fact, when we received specific and credible allegations of fraud, made an effort to look into these to satisfy ourselves that they were without merit. And I was in the posture of trying to figure out, there was an avalanche of all these allegations of fraud that built up over a number of days, and it was like playing whack-a-mole because something would come out one day and then the next day it would be another issue. Also, I was influenced by the fact that all the early claims that I understood were completely bogus and silly and usually based on complete misinformation. And so I didn't consider the quality of claims right out of the box to give me any feeling that there was really substance here.
For the first time since the election, the Attorney General spoke personally with the President on November 23rd, and this was at the White House. Let's play the video, please.
So on November 23rd, I hadn't spoken to the President since the election, and in fact, as I said, since the middle of October, roughly. And it was a little getting awkward because obviously he had lost the election and I hadn't said anything to him. And so Cipollone said, I think it's time you come over here. And so I came over to meet with the President in the Oval Office, and Meadows and Cipollone were there. And the President, and this is leading up to this conversation with Kushner, the President said there had been major fraud, and that as soon as the facts were out, the results of the election would be reversed. And he went on this for quite a while, as he's prone to do, and then he got to something
stick that zinger in there,
which is to say that apparently the Department of Justice doesn't think that it has a role of looking into these fraud claims. And I said, that has to be the campaign that raises that with the state. The department doesn't take side in elections, and the department is not an extension of your legal team. And our role is to investigate fraud, and we'll look at something if it's specific, credible, and could have affected the outcome of the election. And we're doing that, and it's just not. They're just not meritorious. They're not panning out. And as I walked out of the Oval Office, Jared was there with Dan Scavino, who ran the president's social media, and who I thought was a reasonable guy and believe is a reasonable guy. And I said, how long is he going to carry on with this stolen election stuff? Where's this going to go? And by that time, Meadows had caught up with me and leaving the office and caught up with me and said that he said, look, I think that he's becoming more realistic and knows that there's a limit to how far he can take this. And then Jared said, yeah, we're working on this. We're working on it.
Even after his attorney general told him his claims of election fraud were false.
Oh, now his
Trump
attorney general. Okay.
Promote these claims.
All right.
I felt that things continued to deteriorate between the 23rd and the weekend of the 29th. And then on November 29th, he appeared on Maria Bartiromo's show, Sunday Futures, I believe it was. And he said that the department was missing in action.
Well, no, we had glitches where they moved thousands of votes from my account to Biden's account. And these are glitches. So they're not glitches, they're theft. They're fraud, absolute fraud. This election was over, and then they did dumps. They call them dumps, big, massive dumps in Michigan and Pennsylvania and all over. How the FBI and Department of Justice, I don't know, maybe they're involved, but how people are allowed to get away from this stuff with this stuff is unbelievable.
Now, spurred by what he saw, Barr told the Associated Press on December 1st that there was no evidence of election fraud. And immediately after Attorney General Barr's statement went public, Mr. Trump berated and he nearly fired Barr. But Barr persisted in telling the president that there was no evidence to support the fraud claims.
This got under my skin, but I also felt it was time for me to say something. So I set up a lunch with the AP reporter, Mike Balsamo, and I told him at lunch, I made this statement that to date we have not seen fraud on a scale that could have affected a different outcome in the election. I had a later meeting scheduled at the White House at 3 o'clock with Meadows. This was previously scheduled, so I knew this was going to come up, and I went over there and I told my secretary that I thought I would probably be fired and told not to go home. I mean, not to go back to my office. Yeah. So I said, you might have to pack up for me. And so when I got over there, I met with the chief of staff. He said the president was angry. He didn't really get into the issue of the fraud. And then I went up to Pat Cipolloni's office and we were talking with each other. And word came down that he wanted us both to go to the Oval. And the president was as mad as I've ever seen him, and he was trying to control himself. And the president said, well, this is killing me. You didn't have to say this. You must have said this because you hate Trump. You hate Trump. And then he raised the big vote dump, as he called it, in Detroit. And that, he said people saw boxes coming into the counting station at all hours of the morning and so forth. And I explained to him that at that point I knew the exact number of precincts in Detroit. I think it was 630 something. I said, Mr. President, there are 630 precincts in Detroit, and unlike elsewhere in the state, they centralized the counting process, so they're not counted in each precinct. They're moved to counting stations, and so the normal process would involve boxes coming in at all different hours. So there's nothing. And I said, did anyone point out to you, did all the people complaining about it point out to you actually did better in Detroit than you did last time? I mean, there's no indication of fraud in Detroit. And I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public was bullshit. I mean, that the claims of fraud were bullshit. And
yeah, I'm going to keep hearing that.
About that. And I reiterated that they wasted a whole month on these claims on the Dominion voting machines, and they were idiotic claims. And I specifically raised the Dominion voting machines, which I found to be among the most disturbing allegations. Disturbing in the sense that I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations, but they were made in such a sensational way that they obviously were influencing a lot of people, members of the public, that there was this systemic corruption in the system and that their votes didn't count and that these machines controlled by somebody else were actually determining it, which was complete nonsense. And it was being laid out there. And I told them that it was crazy stuff and they were wasting their time on that. And it was doing a grave disservice to the country.
Okay, so the very next day, the president released a video rehashing some of the very same claims that his chief law enforcement officer had told him were, quote, nonsense.
I think he used the term
Here's
BS.
an example. This is Michigan. At 6:31 in the morning, a vote dump of 149,772 votes came in unexpectedly. We were winning by a lot. That batch was received in horror. We have a company that's very suspect. Its name is Dominion. With the turn of a dial or the change of a chip, you can press a button for Trump and the vote goes to Biden. What kind of a system is this?
Barr again told the president that there was nothing to these claims on December 14th.
When I walked in, sat down, he went off on a monologue saying that there was now definitive evidence involving fraud through the Dominion machines. And a report had been prepared by a very reputable cybersecurity firm, which he identified as Allied Security Operations Group, and he held up the report, and then he asked that a copy of it be made for me. And while a copy was being made, he said, this is absolute proof that the Dominion machines were rigged. The report means that I'm going to have a second term. And then he gave me a copy of the report. And as he talked more and more about it, I sat there flipping through the report and looking through it. And to be frank, it looked very amateurish to me. Didn't have the credentials of the people involved, but I didn't see any real qualifications. And the statements were made very conclusory, like, these machines were designed to, engage in fraud or something to that effect, but I didn't see any supporting information for it. And I was...
They're scoring some points here. I mean, he's just going through debunking the bigger claims that Trump's team was making at this point. And I do think Trump made a mistake after the election claiming Dominion fraud and this and that, because it turns out you can't prove it because you can't get your hot hands on the machine. So it doesn't do any good. You'd be much better off going with the 2,000 mules and all the election changes.
An indication of interest in what the actual facts were. In my opinion then, and my opinion now, is that the election was not stolen by fraud. And I haven't seen anything since the election that changes my mind on that, including the 2,000 Mules movie.
Oh, wow.
Well, maybe you can assess that 2,000 mules, and people are talking about that.
Oh, boy.
Well, I mean, just in a
wow,
nutshell,
this is interesting here. I
just
can't
think
believe they're going to
that
go into
the
this.
GBI was unimpressed with it, and I was similarly unimpressed
GBI
with
is
it.
the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
Because I was holding my fire on that to see what the photographic evidence was, because I thought, well, hell, if they have a lot of photographs of the same person dumping a lot of ballots in different boxes, that's hard to explain. So I wanted to see what the photographic evidence was. But the cell phone data is singularly unimpressive. I mean, if you take 2 million cell phones and figure out where they are physically in a big city like Atlanta or wherever, just by definition, you're going to find many hundreds of them have passed by and spent time in the vicinity of these boxes
Now, see, the 2,000 Mules people factored that in, and they have a way of accounting for that. What you're seeing here is Bill Barr all in, just going against Trump. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's normally very circumspect. That right there is bad evidence. And then also, as to the video, even though there was supposed to be video of every single Dropbox, you don't get video of every single Dropbox. So, again, Barr is, I don't know why he's doing this. This is why Trump got so mad at him. He probably would have tolerated the stuff on the Dominion, but this is Barr talking about things he knows nothing about, and he's wrong. You had to go by a Dropbox more than 10 times, and the film they accounted for before and after. In other words, it was only if it was unusual. 6 months before the election, and you were doing that same pattern, you weren't counted. Barr doesn't know what he's talking about.
And the premise that, if you go by a box, 5 boxes or whatever it was, that's a mule is just indefensible. It by definition, you're going to have hundreds of this. I mean, I saw one contractor said, we figured out that our truck alone would account for 6 cell phone signals.
They factored that out, folks. That's not true.
Some kind of contractor. And, our route would take us by these things on a regular basis. So
shows you how much influence the deep state has.
I think the photographic evidence in it was completely I mean, there was a little bit of it, but it was lacking.
Well, because they didn't have it. You can't produce what doesn't exist, Bill Barr. I am flabbergasted he's doing this.
Illegal
wow.
harvesting. The other thing is people don't understand is that it's not clear that even if you can show harvesting, that changes the results of the election. The courts are not going to throw out votes.
Yes, they are legally. Oh, wow.
And then figure out what votes.
Bill Barr's wrong. The law, they will throw it out. They absolutely will.
Challenging party to show that illegal votes were cast. Votes were the result of undue influence or bribes, or there was really, the person was non compos mentis. But absent that evidence, I just didn't see courts throwing out votes anyway. I felt that before the election, it was possible to talk sense to the president. And while you sometimes had to engage in, a big wrestling match with him, that it was possible to keep things on track. But I felt that after the election, he didn't seem to be listening, and I didn't think it was. That I was inclined not to stay around if he wasn't listening to advice from me or his other cabinet secretaries.
So on December 14th, Barr quit. Now, the Attorney General wasn't the only person who told the president that his claims were false. Other officials and close advisors told him the same thing.
Other than try to address a counterfactual or a hypothetical, let me just say there were instances where the president would say, people are telling me this, or I've heard this, or I saw on television, this impropriety in Atlanta or Pennsylvania or something. And we were in a position to say, our people have already looked at that, and we know that you're getting bad information, that's not correct. It's been demonstrated to be incorrect from our point of view, and been debunked.
A month and a half or so after the election day, and at that meeting, various allegations of fraud were discussed, and Eric and Pat didn't, told the group, the president included, that none of those allegations had been substantiated to the point where they could be the basis for any litigation challenge to the election.
President Trump's own vice president and his top advisors also knew that there wasn't evidence to support the claims that the president was making.
Anyone else other than Mr. Meadows who asked you about the status outside of your legal group, Mr. Morgan and the others you mentioned, anyone else who asked you the status of what you were finding in your assessment of it?
Yes, sir.
Who's that?
Peter Navarro.
When did you talk to Mr. Navarro?
Mid-November.
Around the same time as Mr. Meadows?
Yes, sir.
And tell me about that conversation.
I recall him asking me questions about Dominion and maybe some other categories of allegations of voter fraud. And I remember telling him that I didn't believe the Dominion allegations because I thought the hand recount in Georgia would resolve any issues with the technology problem and with Dominion or Dominion flipping votes. And I mentioned at that time that the CISA, Chris Krebs, had recently released a report saying that the election was secure. And I believe Mr. Navarro accused me of being an agent of the deep state working with Chris Krebs against the president.
How do you know we're not?
And
How do we know you're not?
From Mr. Navarro.
Anyone else besides Mr. Meadows, Mr. Navarro, Mr. Hirschman that you had discussions with, inquiring about what you were finding in your review of the allegations that were pouring in?
I believe I had about a 15-second conversation with the vice president about it as well.
When was that?
During one of the visits to the White House. I don't know which one. I think it was the first one in November. I had met him briefly at the campaign, and he remembered me and saw me. And he asked what I was doing on the campaign, and I told him that, you know, we were looking into some of the issues related to voter fraud. And he asked me, I don't remember his exact words, but he asked me if we were finding anything. And I said that I didn't believe we were finding it, or I was not personally finding anything sufficient to alter the results of the election. And he thanked me. That was our interaction.
At a later hearing, you'll hear live testimony from the former acting Deputy Attorney General of the Department of Justice, Rich Donahue. But now I'd like to play a portion of his testimony.
All right, before we go on to that, let me pause it real quick. Folks, at this point, what they've done, they said they were going to show there was no election fraud. What they've shown is a bunch of people within Trump's own orbit did not buy the widespread fraud, and they've mainly focused on Dominion. Now, they've kind of tried to just pass at it on 2,000 Mules. Like, let me let Barr talk about how ridiculous it is. Again, they've led with their chin. They're going to get it knocked off because Bill Barr said about 2,000 Mules is not true. He's getting that from the mainstream media, which tells you a lot about Barr, where Barr is now at least, and he should know better, but set that aside. So they really haven't done what they've claimed they're going to do. And it's just been kind of amateur hour here, but let's go ahead and get back to this. I want you to understand, they have not gone to the issues of the election integrity, how we voted. Those are the things that, again, I've showed you in prior live streams. I'll show you again today when we wrap this up. But that's where we're getting to the issue. So there's two types of fraud that Trump was claiming. One would be Dominion, stuffing ballot boxes, all this stuff. And then number two is election integrity. You're voting in a way that's not constitutionally cognizable based on the laws. You changed the way we were supposed to vote in a way that favored Biden. And you heard them earlier say that. They haven't addressed that at all. But anyway, let's listen to this fellow.
Again, put this in perspective and try to put it in very clear terms to the president. And I said something to the effect of, sir, we've done dozens of investigations, hundreds of interviews. The major allegations are not supported by the evidence developed. We've looked at Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Nevada. We're doing our job. Much of the info you're getting is false. And then I went into, for instance, this thing from Michigan, this report about 68% error rate. Reality is it was only 0.0063% error rate, less than 1 in 15,000. So the president accepted that. He said, okay, fine, but what about the others? And again, this gets back to the point that there were so many of these allegations that when you gave him a very direct answer on one of them, he wouldn't fight us on it, but he would move to another allegation.
So then I talked about a little bit about the Pennsylvania truck driver. This is another allegation that had come up. And this claim was by a truck driver who believed, perhaps honestly, that he had transported an entire tractor-trailer truck full of ballots from New York to Pennsylvania. And this was, again, out there in the public and discussed. And I essentially said, look, we looked at that allegation. We looked at both ends, both the people who load the truck and the people who unload the truck. And that allegation was not supported by the evidence. Again, he said, okay. And then he said, no, I didn't mention that one. What about the others? And I said, okay, well, with regard to Georgia, we looked at the tape, we interviewed the witnesses. There is no suitcase. The president kept fixating on this suitcase that supposedly had fraudulent ballots, and the suitcase was rolled out from under the table. And I said, no, sir, there is no suitcase. You can watch that video over and over. There is no suitcase. There is a wheeled bin where they carry the ballots, and that's just how they move ballots around that facility. There's nothing suspicious about that at all.
This is the Fulton County claim.
I told them that there was no multiple scanning of the ballots. One part of that allegation was that they were taking one ballot and scanning it through 3 or 4 or 5 times to rack up votes, presumably for Vice President Biden. I told them that the video did not support that. Then he went off on double voting at the top of the next page. He said, dead people are voting. Indians are getting paid to vote. He meant people on Native American reservations. He said there's lots of fraud going on here. Told him flat out that much of the information he's getting is false and or just not supported by the evidence. We look at the allegations, but they don't pan out.
Mr. Barr and his advisors were not the only ones who determined that the president's allegations regarding Dominion voting machines were false. So, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record of this hearing reports issued by the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, otherwise known as CISA, that addressed and rejected the claims of manipulation of voting machines in the 2020 election.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also ask unanimous consent to include in the record a report prepared by the Michigan Senate Oversight Committee that disproved claims of election fraud in Michigan, as well as a statement by 59 of the country's leading election security scientists, noting the absence of any credible evidence that the 2020 election had been altered through technical compromise, and 5 other reports from organizations and individuals confirming there was no widespread fraud in the 2020 election or describing the spread of the former president's lies.
A bunch of self-serving reports, so what?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We hired people that we knew what they would say, and they said it. Boring.
Pursuant to the order of the committee for today,
sounds like we're going
Chair
to
declares the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, while they go on recess, let's revisit what we've heard here. What's going on? Today they haven't spent a lot of time. Today they haven't spent a lot of time with the. Hold on a second. Let me get back. Where is it? No, that's not it. Oh, come on. Here we go. We'll put a pause on that. We'll come back to it. So they haven't spent a lot of time today. Basically, what they've done today is they're basically painting Trump with a very broad brush, and they've scored some points. It doesn't help that there were people within Trump's orbit that were telling him that they didn't believe the fraud. Now, folks, this is not an uncommon thing, but what they're basically trying to show, and all they really can show, is that there were some people that believed that there was no election fraud. And these people were telling Trump that there was no election fraud. So since these people told you there was no election fraud, there was no election fraud. That doesn't work that way. There were other people. And again, this is where the committee would be far more entertaining, and it would be far more informative if we had people from the opposition party. Again, Pelosi would not let anybody from the opposition party be appointed. So all we're hearing is from the Democrat side. And when we only hear from the Democrat side, you don't get that. So, for example, we don't get people like Navarro or other people out there, Eastman, for example, who were laying out different elements of problems that existed with the election. Another point that they're not getting because they don't have the other side out there is, yeah, there were a lot of claims of election fraud. This is a big country. You have to understand the presidential election in the United States is not just one big election. It's actually a bunch of different elections that are going on. Okay, and so when we understand that it's a bunch of different elections that are going on at one time, you have to understand that you're looking at 50 states, you're looking at hundreds of counties within states, and each of them are carrying on a little election. Of course, there are a lot of things to do, but therein lies the point. A lot of people after the election, and the AP calls it, right? That's it. And that's what the committee is here designed to do. They're designed to say, essentially, they don't say it this way, but their argument is essentially this. Once there are election reporting by the mainstream media, the AP, what have you, once they call the election and it's for a Democrat, that's it. You can't do anything. Of course, if they call it, so again, let's go back to 2004, if they call it for George W. Bush and you're Democrats, you can go and challenge the certification. No problem. That's perfectly legit. But if they call it for a Democrat, you can't do that. Only if they call it for a Republican. That's literally what they're saying. And what we've seen this morning is we've seen them come out and go, well, look, President Trump didn't actually believe it because a few people within his orbit didn't believe it. Okay, so what? And again, I think they made some mistakes in some of the testimony they brought in. The two campaign managers that basically said, yeah, we didn't see any fraud. Folks, their job is to go out there and get jobs, managing campaigns. Do you think for 1 millisecond they're going to go out and go, oh, yeah, well, I had this job and, I helped challenge the election certification, so no Democrat's going to hire you. You're done. And then among the Republicans, there'll be some Republicans that will hire you, but then a lot that won't because of the way the Republican Party. So no one's going to come in and say something. Plus, you've got each of the campaigns are conflicted because they lost. So they got to come up with some reason why they lost, right? And so they're not going to sit there. They're going to say, oh, well, I took over. It was too bad a situation. And the other guy's going to go, well, when I came in, they did a bunch of things that I wouldn't have done. I was going to win the election. So, but they have scored some points in showing that Trump kind of went all in with some theories that got debunked. They would have been much better, and a lot of people around Trump's orbit at that time were saying, hey, you need to focus on the issues of the way in which the election changed. But they did score some points here this morning. I mean, again, when it's a show trial, you have to understand what a show trial is. Show trials should literally be nothing but the Harlem Globetrotters playing whatever team they're playing. It should all be layups and dunks. And so they've taken what would be some layups and some dunks, and they've made some mistakes. For example, letting Barr drone on about 2,000 mules. For example, letting Barr drone on to where he's saying these clearly negative things about Trump. I mean, frankly, that's not as powerful as you think. It would be much more powerful had Bill Barr remained very stern, very circumspect, the Barr that we usually see on the media, and said, well, I thought some of these things were too far. I urge the president to, respect the peaceful transfer of power and that there might be some smoke, but we haven't proof of fire yet. No. When he starts going in and he's all in, Trump's angry, Trump's mad, it just goes to show that what I see is that there's a lot of bad blood between Bill Barr and other people. And then some of those other people saying, we looked at this, we looked at that. That doesn't mean anything. I mean, we all know, folks, that the 2020 election has not been fully looked at and audited. And so I think they made some mistakes doing that. But let me pull up real quick. I can pull it up, I think. Let me pull up for you the best explanation of, and again, I want you to understand the big takeaway. They have not, I don't know when they're going to get around to challenging the election certification. It doesn't look like they're going to get to it today. Today was just, they were going all in to just basically try and make Trump look like he's nuts about some of these things. Let's see if I can pull this up for you. We pulled this up last, and you really can't do it enough of it. Here we go. All right, so that's not it. No, wait a minute. Where is it? Come on. Why is it not coming up? There it is. All right, cool. So this is the guy doing an ad.
Austin and his company.
Sorry. I'm going to while the ad runs, I'm going to keep it muted. So this is going to be Peter Navarro, who has been subpoenaed by the committee. He's now being charged with contempt. He's obviously not here. They tried to get him to come in. We'll see if he ultimately decides to come in. I'm not really sure why he wouldn't come in and talk to him, but this is where the committee has avoided this part of it. Okay, and we talked earlier when we started this live stream. We talked about David, Judge Carter's opinion there about the more likely than not. Okay, they're back.
I guess I am the trade guy, but tonight I think I'm the January 6th guy. The In Trump Time book shows unequivocally that both Stephen K. Bannon and President Trump should be exonerated of any violence on Capitol Hill on January 6th. And what I show in the In Trump Time book is this plan we had called the Green Bay Sweep, clearly between constitutional and legal lines, to basically have only legal votes counted in the election. And we had
mentioned
recruited,
that we prepared for that. So let's take a look. You mentioned this plan. Here's Steve Bannon talking about it on January 6th.
So I keep saying the mantra. You call the play, now run the play, right? It's like the old Green Bay power sweep. It's very simple.
Oh, wait, they're coming back. I got to stop this.
Very logical. And
all right, let's get back to the hearing. Here it is. See if I reset it. It shouldn't come back. Please don't make me see another ad. Oh, come on. Sorry, another ad. So while they're running the ad, we'll keep that silence while they run. Okay, skip ad. We should be back. All right, we're back. So it looks like we got 3 more people. Wonder what they're going to say.
Reflect the witnesses answered in the affirmative.
Okay, they got sworn in. You didn't miss anything.
Pursuant to Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, I now recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before the break, I think you all heard Mr. Barr and Mr. Donahue talk about the false claims that Mr. Trump and his supporters made about suitcases of fake ballots in Georgia. We have a witness here today who thoroughly investigated that issue.
Oh, okay.
Mr.
We'll look at Georgia.
Thank
Interesting.
you for appearing before us today. You were appointed by President Trump to serve as a U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, and you served from 2017 until January of 2021. You were the lead federal prosecutor there and worked for the Department of Justice under then Attorney General Bill Barr. Now, were you ever asked by Attorney General Barr to investigate claims of voter fraud in the 2020 election? And if so, what were those claims?
Thank you, Congressman Lofgren. Thank you for the question. Approximately December 4th, I believe, of 2020, Attorney General Barr and I had a conversation about an unrelated case to the case at issue. At the end of the conversation, Mr. Barr had asked me if I had seen a certain videotape that was being reported in the news where Mr. Giuliani, in a Senate subcommittee hearing that was held the day before, May 3rd, showed a videotape of a purportedly a security tape at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta, which is also in Fulton County, in the city of Atlanta. I'm sorry, city of, yes.
Yes, city of Atlanta. You're right, Fulton County. One of the many counties Atlanta's in.
That he had made a public statement that he had not seen any widespread election fraud that would question the outcome of the election. And because of the videotape and the serious allegation that Mr. Giuliani was making with respect to the suitcase full of ballots purported in the video, he asked me to find out what I could about it, because he had envisioned that in some days after our call that he was going to go to the White House for a meeting, and then that issue might come up. He asked me to make it a priority to get to the bottom of, just try to substantiate the allegation made by Mr. Giuliani.
This is good. If it actually produces something, it'll be good.
Office investigated those State Farm Arena allegations and didn't find any evidence of fraud. What did you find when your office
that's not true, actually.
conducted its own investigation?
We found
that what she just said is not true.
Suitcase full full
The
of
state
ballots.
did not
The
find that.
alleged black suitcase that was being seen pulled from under the table was actually an official lockbox where ballots were kept safe. We found out that there was a mistake in terms of a misunderstanding that they were done counting ballots or tallying ballots for the night, and the partisan watchers that was assigned by each of the respective parties were announced to send home. But once they realized the mistake, someone from the Secretary of State's office had indicated that no, we're not done for the night. You need to go ahead and continue counting. So once they packed up the lockbox full of ballots, they brought back the official ballot box again and continue to tally the ballots from that.
Without
from
the watchers being there. That was one of the problems.
Unfortunately, during the Senate hearing, Mr. Giuliani only played a clip that showed them pulling out the official ballot box from under the table and referring to that as a smoking gun of a fraud in Fulton County. But in actuality, in review of the entire video, it showed that that was actually an official ballot box that was kept underneath the tables. And then we saw them pack up because of the announcement that they thought they were done for the night. And then once the announcement was made that you should continue counting, they brought the ballot box out and they continued to count. The FBI interviewed the individuals that are depicted in the videos that purportedly were double, triple counting of the ballots, and determined that nothing irregular happened in the counting, and the allegations
There's no way you
made
could
by
determine
Mr.
that, though.
Giuliani, were false.
You can't
Thank
determine
you very
that.
much. I'd like to play again a testimony from Mr. Donahue, who appeared before the committee before today.
Mr. Donahue, we talked at some length about whether or not the White House or the president was informed about the Antrim report. On the results of the investigations, the interviews that have gone on Fulton County, how would those results have been communicated to the White House, to the president?
I don't know how they were initially communicated. I do know that they came up in subsequent conversations with the president, and Dag Rose and I essentially told him, we looked into that, and it's just not true.
Okay, so he was informed.
I told the president myself that several times in several conversations, that these allegations about ballots being smuggled in a suitcase and run through the machine several times, it was not true. That we looked at the video, we interviewed the witnesses, it was not true.
Mr. Pack, after you left the U.S. Attorney's Office on January 4th, 2021, did the next U.S. Attorney there, I think Mr. Trump's personal pick, Bobby Christine, did he investigate any remaining claims of fraud? And if so, did he find any evidence that supported the president's claims of voter fraud?
It is my understanding that Mr. Christine continued any investigations that were pending at the time of my departure, but he was unable to find any evidence of fraud that affected the outcome of the election.
Now, they're scoring some points here real quick. They are. I'm not going to deny it. But here's the problem. The problem is he left out the fact that the for whatever reason, the partisan poll watchers, the Republicans that were there, they were told that they weren't going to count and they went home. And then they pulled them out and they started counting again. Now, I don't know how he's going to prove it, and he hasn't laid out the evidence. So they're giving us his opinion. Well, show me the daggone video that shows they didn't do it, and admit the fact that the Republican watchers went home. But he didn't do that. So again, typical show trial right here.
So after investigating the president's and Mr. Giuliani's claims about voter fraud in Georgia, is it your view today that there was no evidence of widespread fraud?
Show us the evidence. Show us your evidence.
Confidence in the outcome of the election in Georgia.
That is correct.
And he was fired. You heard him. He left on the
Pack, and I wanna
4th, which
thank
means
you
he was
also
fired
for the service
and was
that you've
replaced.
given to
So
our
he's
country.
conflicted.
We appreciate
All right.
that.
So again, show trial doesn't give you
Next,
anything.
I'd like to turn to President
Again, folks.
Trump's false allegations about election integrity in Philadelphia. The Attorney General discussed these allegations at some length.
You know, the idea, the president has repeatedly suggested that there was some kind of outpouring of unexpected votes in inner city areas like Philadelphia as recently as January 13th when he walked off the NPR set. He was asked by the interviewer, what's your evidence of fraud? And he said more people voted in Philadelphia than there were voters. And that was absolute rubbish. The turnout in Philadelphia was in line with the state's turnout. And in fact, it was not as impressive as many suburban counties. And there was nothing strange about the Philadelphia turnout. It wasn't like there was all these unexpected votes that came out in Philadelphia. So, I think once you actually look at the votes, and then there's an obvious explanation. For example, in Pennsylvania, Trump ran weaker than the Republican ticket generally. He ran weaker than two of the state candidates. He ran weaker than the congressional delegate.
They say this all the time. It doesn't prove anything. In other words,
and he ran weaker than the Republic, I think. I haven't looked at this.
Stop it here so we can say it. We don't have much more to go. I think they're about wrapping up. Folks, this is something they throw out all the time. It doesn't mean anything. In other words, it proves the exact opposite. I'm really disappointed in Bill Barr this morning. Really am. It proves the exact opposite. In other words, if they were having mules dump Biden ballots, of course Trump would run weaker than other Republicans. What you're assuming is that all the ballots that went in, right, that people that committed fraud, they were like, oh, well, I guess I better vote for this person in Congress, and I guess I better vote for this person running for Senate, and I guess I better vote for governor of Pennsylvania too. That's not the way it works, Bill Barr. Jeez. I mean, this is amateur hour.
A weak element on the Republican ticket, so that does not suggest that the election was stolen by fraud.
How about Pennsylvania and Bill McSwain? We were talking to the U.S. Attorney in Philadelphia about an alleged discrepancy between the number of absentee ballots issued and the number of ballots cast.
Right. So that was one of the big ones for a period of time. I think that was raised at Gettysburg by Giuliani or something like that. But it kept on being repeated, and I found it annoying because it didn't seem that it was right. So I called McSwain, and he got back to me. He said, no, the problem is that Mastriano threw out this number, and what he did was he mixed apples and oranges. He took the number of applications for the Republican primary, and he compared it to the number of absentee votes cast in the general election. But once you actually go and look and compare apples to apples, there's no discrepancy at all.
So again, what they're doing here, they've already gone through the testimony. They're picking the big ones that they were able to debunk. If we were there, I'd want to see every single solitary one, but they're not going to do that.
Today, who has detailed knowledge about the election process in Philadelphia. Mr. Schmidt, at the time of the 2020 presidential election, you were serving as the only Republican member of Philadelphia's 3-member city commission, which is responsible for overseeing elections throughout the city. Is that correct?
That's correct, Congressperson.
He's already conflicted.
President Trump made numerous claims
because he's not going to say he did a bad job, right? But let's hear his testimony.
Including the claim that dead people were voting. In fact, Mr. Giuliani told Pennsylvania state legislators that 8,000 dead people voted in Pennsylvania. You investigated those claims of voter fraud.
Show us the evidence, ma'am, please.
Not only was there not evidence of 8,000 dead voters voting in Pennsylvania, there wasn't evidence of 8. We took seriously every case that was referred to us, no matter how fantastical, no matter how absurd, and took every one of those seriously, including these.
He comes across as a good witness. I'll give him that.
Even Mr. Trump's campaign lawyers knew that the dead voter claims weren't valid.
No.
I guess the crooks in Philadelphia are disappointed in this. They only submitted 8,021 ballots from dead people, mail-in ballots for dead people. It's probably easier for dead people to submit mail-in ballots than it is to vote in person.
Rudy was, at this stage of his life, in the same ability to manage things at this level or not. And obviously, I think Bernie Kerik publicly said it. They never proved the allegations that they were making, and they were trying to develop.
Mr. Schmidt, on November 11th, 2020, President Trump tweeted about you, saying, and here's a quote, "A guy named Al Schmidt, a Philadelphia commissioner and so-called Republican, or rhino, is being used big time by the fake news media to explain how honest things were with respect to the election in Philadelphia. He refuses to look at a mountain of corruption, dishonesty. We win. As a result of that tweet and the CNN interview you gave where you stated the dead voter claims in Pennsylvania were false, you and your staff were subjected to disturbing threats. Can you tell us about that?
Okay, now this is going to be powerful because it's a show trial. But again, I want you to understand, you're hearing from this guy, his opinion. He came here basically to say, I'm not going to show you the evidence that I looked at, but I looked at some evidence, and I found it to be not 8,000, not even 8. And then I was attacked by the president, and I didn't like that, and I received threats, and I went on CNN, and I'm here to tell you all this stuff. Like, it's from a show trial perspective, it gets human beings excited, but you've had somebody like a defense lawyer to stand up and say, isn't it true you were upset? He's very conflicted, and he hasn't shown us the evidence. But anyway, let's hear the supposed threats, which, by the way, I guarantee there'll be no evidence. There'll be no, let me play the voice message. There'll be no text, no nothing.
The threats prior to that tweet, and on some level it feels almost silly to talk about a tweet, but we can really see the impact that they have, because prior to that, the threats were pretty general in nature. Corrupt election officials in Philadelphia are going to get what's coming to them. You're what the Second Amendment is for. You're walking into the lion's den.
I hate it, but it's effective. I hate it. Shouldn't be, but it is.
At me by name, calling me out the way that he did, the threats became much more specific, much more graphic, and included not just me by name, but included members of my family by name, their ages, our address, pictures of our home, just every bit of detail that you could imagine. That was what changed with that tweet.
Behind me are redacted threats that you received, that you provided.
We are going to see them. It's been redacted.
Redacted portions of the text to protect your family. Mr. Schmidt, I think I speak for all of my colleagues when I say we are deeply sorry for what you and your loved ones have been through. And
nobody supports threats or intimidation of public officials.
And for standing up for the rule of law. I want to thank both Mr. Pack and Mr. Schmidt for their service, their testimony, and for standing up for the rule of law. Now I'd like to turn to another subject. The courts in our country provide a legitimate venue for campaigns to challenge what they view as irregular election practices. Now, courts
That's a
have
lie.
the final say
She's lying.
in how
It's
the
not
law
true.
applies to those challenges. We have a renowned legal expert here to address the
Good.
Trump campaign's activities in court.
Good.
Mr. Ginsburg, you've spent your entire career representing Republicans in election-related litigation. You served as the National Counsel on Republican presidential campaigns in 2000, in 2004, and in 2012. You played a key role in the 2000 Florida recount that led to the Supreme Court's decision in Bush v. Gore. You served as the co-chair of the Presidential Commission on Election Administration. I think it's fair to say you're the most prominent Republican lawyer who's litigated in the election field.
That's
now, you've
reasonably fair.
analyzed the Trump campaign's litigation pretty carefully. What's the normal process for post-election litigation? How is the Trump campaign's different from the kinds of post-election litigation you've been involved in and know about?
In the normal course of things, any campaign on the night of the election and the days after will do a couple of different things. One is that they'll analyze precinct results to look for abnormalities in the results, and they'll send people to those precincts to ask more questions. Secondly, all campaigns will have poll watchers and poll workers and observers in the polling place. And so campaigns will talk to those people if they saw any irregularities that could cause problems in the election. Now, the Trump campaign talked pre-election about having 50,000 poll workers. So presumably, they did have eyes on the ground in all these places.
They actually didn't do that.
So in the normal course of things, a campaign will analyze the reports that come in. Trump campaign had a couple of basic problems, however. Number one, the 2020 election was not close. In 2000, that was 537 and close. In this election, the most narrow margin was 10,000 and something in Arizona. And
that
you
is
just
close,
don't
by the
make
way.
up those sorts of numbers in recounts.
Yeah,
And when
well,
the
nobody's
claims
talking about a
of
recount.
fraud and irregularities were made. You've heard very compelling testimony from Mr. Stepien, from Matt Morgan, from Alex Cannon about those claims and how they didn't believe them. And so that put the Trump campaign on sort of a process of bringing cases without the actual evidence that you have to have in which the process is designed to bring out.
So are you aware of any instance in which a court found the Trump campaign's fraud claims to be credible?
No, there was never that instance. In all the cases that were brought, and I've looked at the more than 60 that include more than 180 counts. And no, the simple fact is that the Trump campaign did not make its case.
Again,
the Select Committee has identified
show trial.
62 post-election lawsuits filed by the Trump campaign.
All right,
and
this
its
is how simple. This is what a show trial is,
between
okay?
November 4th.
Let's stop this for a second. We'll come right back to it. Here's his, again, Wikipedia left. Check this out. Boom. In September 2020, the Washington Post published an op-ed, September, 2 months before the election. Ginsburg that criticized Donald Trump for encouraging supporters to commit voter fraud. He did no such thing. And for making false statements claiming fraud was widespread when it was not. Ginsburg wrote, the truth is that after decades of looking for illegal voting, we never had an election like we had in 2020, by the way. There's no proof of widespread voter fraud. That might have been true back then. At most, there are isolated instances by both Democrats and Republicans. Elections are not rigged. Absentee ballots use the same process as mail-in ballots. That's just false. Folks, that's all you need to know about this guy. Again, that's why the show trial brought him in, because he's a partisan. He may be a Republican, but he's a Republican partisan.
2021. Those cases resulted in 61 losses and only a single victory, which actually didn't affect the outcome for either candidate.
Now,
Despite
if he
those
doesn't tell you
61
it's based on
losses,
technicalities.
President Trump and his allies claim that the courts refused to hear them out, and as a result, they never had their day in court. Mr. Ginsburg, what do you say about the claims that Mr. Trump wasn't given an opportunity to provide the evidence they had of voter fraud? Did they have their day in court?
They did have their day in court. About half of those cases that you mentioned were dismissed at the procedural stage for a lack of standing. The proper people didn't bring
that's
the
fair.
case,
That's true.
or there wasn't sufficient evidence and it got dismissed on a motion to dismiss.
Right.
But in the other, there was discussion of the merits that was
Name one. Name
in
one.
the complaints.
Name
and
one.
In no instance did a court find that the charges of fraud were real.
There were very
It's
few
also
where they got
worth
to the
noting
evidence.
that even if the Trump campaign complained that it did not have its day in court, there have been post-election reviews in each of the 6 battleground states that could have made a
Absolutely not
difference.
true.
And those ranged from the somewhat farcical Cyber Ninjas case in Arizona
See, there you go.
to the Michigan Senate report that was mentioned
Unfortunately,
earlier,
revealing your
the hand
partisanship.
recount in Georgia that Mr. Pack addressed. And in each one of those instances, there was no credible evidence of fraud produced by the Trump campaign.
What about
or his
2,000 mules? What about 2,000
Thank
mules?
you. You know, as Mr. Ginsburg has explained, there are no cases where the Trump campaign was able to convince a court that there was widespread fraud or irregularities in the 2020 election.
That's true, but they were never given the opportunity. In other words, folks, just so we're all clear here, let's all get on the same page. No one, not one single solitary person, has gotten the voting records from any state and gone through all of them. The January 6th committee could do that. Go get Georgia, get every single solitary vote, starting with the first person in line to the last person on the voter rolls. Let's go through every single solitary vote. Let's do it right now. Boom. The court has not done that. Now, again, this is why you bring in a Republican who's a partisan to say this. The honest answer is he had mostly losses except the one that didn't matter. That's true. They were mostly technical, kicked out, because that's not what these things do. Have you done it? No, we haven't done it. Okay, that's all they're trying to prove.
Over and
Quote
over,
unquote prove.
Judges, appointed by Democrats and Republicans alike, directly refuted this
Yeah,
false
but that is the law. The law is you
narrative.
don't
They
have
called
standing.
out
The law
the
is you don't
Trump
have standing.
campaign's
I don't
lack
know.
of evidence for its claims, and the judges did that even in cases where they could have simply thrown out the lawsuit without writing a word.
No, that's just false. I mean, there were very few where they
You can
went
see
into it.
behind me a few excerpts from the decisions in these 62 cases. The Trump campaign's lack of evidence was criticized by judges across the political spectrum. In Pennsylvania, a Trump-appointed judge concluded, quote, "Charges require specific allegations and proof. We have neither here." Another Trump-appointed judge warned that if cases like these succeeded, quote, "Any disappointed loser in a presidential election able to hire a team of clever lawyers could flag claimed deviations from election results and cast doubt on election results." The list goes on and on. Allegations are called, quote, "an amalgamation of theories, conjecture, and speculation." In another, strained legal arguments without merit, unsupported by evidence, derived from wholly unreliable sources, a fundamental and obvious misreading of the Constitution. The rejection of President Trump's litigation efforts was overwhelming. 22 federal judges appointed by Republican presidents, including 10 appointed by President Trump himself, and at least 24 elected or appointed Republican state judges dismissed the president's claims. At least 11 lawyers have been referred for disciplinary proceedings due to bad faith and baseless efforts to undermine the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. Rudy Giuliani had his license to practice law suspended in New York, and just this week, a newly filed complaint will potentially make his suspension from practicing law in D.C. permanent. And as we've just heard from perhaps the most preeminent Republican election lawyer in recent history, the Trump campaign's unprecedented effort to overturn its election laws in court was a deeply damaging abuse of the judicial process. As stated by U.S. District Court Judge David Carter, this was, quote, "a coup in search."
David Carter is what we were looking at today earlier, folks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
All right, before we get back to Benny, I think they're going to wrap up. Folks, I pulled this up on my YouTube channel. This is Analyzing Judge's Decision Dismissing Purdue's 2020 Election Lawsuit. This is, you want to go check this out. I think it's a 10-minute video. Let's go see if I can back up, see how long it is. It's analyzing, it's 15 minutes. If you look in there, that judge made all kinds of in the ruling on it, he basically says, I'm kicking you out on procedural grounds. But I'm going to say a bunch of things about what I think about your lawsuit in it. That's how you then cut and paste in a show trial and do what she did, okay? The fact of the matter is these courts were not the place to lodge these challenges, and that's why they kicked it out. Very few of them looked at any evidence or gave them any chance to look at any evidence. Again, folks, that's why you do a show trial. If you just show me the evidence, let's look at it together. No. I'm going to go, and I got a bunch of stuff over here, and I'm going to pick things I'm going to show you. It's just nonsense. But anyway, let's go.
I want to thank our witnesses for joining us today. The members of the Select Committee may have additional questions for today's witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing to those questions.
We may need you to make more fantastic statements.
Members will be permitted 10 business days to submit statements for the record, including opening remarks and additional questions for the witnesses. The second panel of witnesses is now dismissed.
That should wrap us up, I think. Hopefully we're done. I'm gonna finish a couple things, and then I'm gonna drop off too. I've got to go do some things, and I've got to do the day's podcast as well. So quite a bit of stuff to do here today. Again, would have been much more powerful if they'd had some Republicans.
Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for a closing statement.
A closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This is not going to be helpful.
Now that we understand the litigation efforts by President Trump and his allies, I'd like to present additional actions taken by the Trump campaign during this time. President Trump continued to push the stolen election narrative, even though he and his allies knew that their litigation efforts, making the same claim, had failed.
Not true.
It's worth pointing out that litigation generally does not continue past the safe harbor date of December 14th. But the fact that
Not
this
true also.
litigation went on, well, that decision makes more sense when you consider the Trump campaign's fundraising tactics. Because if the litigation had stopped on December 14th, there would have been no fight to defend the election and no clear path to continue to raise millions of dollars. Mr. Chairman, at this time, I'd ask for unanimous consent to include in the record a video presentation describing how President Trump used the lies he told to raise millions of dollars from the American people. These fundraising schemes were also part of the effort to disseminate the false claims of election fraud.
One of the few things we learned today that's actually new and interesting.
Investigative counsel with the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. Between Election Day and January 6th, the Trump campaign sent millions of fundraising emails to Trump supporters, sometimes as many as 25 a day. The emails claimed the, quote, left-wing mob was undermining the election, implored supporters to, quote, step up to protect the integrity of the election, and encouraged them to, quote, fight back. But as the Select Committee has demonstrated, the Trump campaign knew these claims of voter fraud were false, yet they continued to barrage small-dollar donors with emails, encouraging them to donate to something called the Official Election Defense Fund. The Select Committee discovered no such fund existed.
I don't believe there is actually a fund called the Election Defense Fund.
Is it fair to say that the Election Defense Fund was another, I think we've called it a marketing tactic? Yes. And tell us about these funds as marketing tactics.
Just a topic matter where money could potentially go to be, how money could potentially be used.
The claims that the election was stolen were so successful, President Trump and his allies raised $250 million, nearly $100 million in the first week after the election. On November 9th, 2020,
But they didn't know that it wasn't going to work
Trump
at that
created a
point.
separate entity
So
called the
why
Save
wouldn't they
America
have raised
PAC. Most of the money raised went to this newly created PAC, not to election-related litigation. The Select Committee discovered that the Save America PAC made millions of dollars of contributions to pro-Trump organizations, including $1 million to Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows' charitable foundation, $1 million to the America First Policy Institute, a conservative organization which employs several former Trump administration officials, $204,857 to the Trump Hotel Collection, and over $5 million to Event Strategies, Inc., the company that ran President Trump's January 6th rally on the Ellipse.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing.
The evidence developed by the Select Committee highlights how the Trump campaign aggressively pushed false election claims to fundraise, telling supporters it would be used to fight voter fraud that did not exist. The emails
Well,
continued
if you're saying it doesn't exist,
even as President Trump
that doesn't work that way.
30 minutes after the last fundraising email was sent, the Capitol was breached.
Just an excuse to show the video. Folks, I'm going to add this as number 7 on my list. This is going to be number 7. Apparently, they're going to try to show that it was all a fundraising scheme. Now, I don't believe that. The first thing they said there is there's no election defense fund. So you're claiming that there's supposed to be a special fund. You're just using the terms. That's not maybe not that they meant that. And then the fact that some of the money went to different places. If it were truly election fraud, then these things would have been indicted and they'd be gone after. It's nothing to this. Again, it's a smear job. They honestly believe the election fraud. I'm going to finish with election fraud again, which they're not covering, but nothing much to see here. And again, the show trial nature of it weakens the point, if you ask me. And this is just an excuse to show a violent video. That's all that was.
Every American is entitled and encouraged to participate in our electoral process. Political fundraising is part of that. Small dollar donors use scarce disposable income to support candidates and causes of their choosing, to make their voices heard. And those donors deserve the truth about what those funds will be used for. Throughout the committee's investigation, we found evidence that the Trump campaign and its surrogates misled donors as to where their funds would go and what they would be used
Garbage.
for.
It is
So
garbage.
not only was there the big lie, there was the big ripoff.
There you
Donors
go.
deserve to know where their funds are really going. They deserve better than what President Trump and his team did. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Again, I think this is another reach. There's not going to be much to
Without
this.
objection, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for a closing statement.
Oh, geez.
Thank you very
Oh,
much,
God.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank all of our witnesses today. And I'd also like to, in particular, wish Mr. Stepien and his family all the best on the arrival of
Okay,
the
all
new
right.
baby.
Come on, get to the point.
Today's hearing, Mr. Chairman, was very narrowly focused. And in the coming days, you will see the committee move on to President Trump's broader planning for January 6th, including his plan to corrupt the Department of Justice.
Wow.
And his detailed planning with lawyer John Eastman.
Okay.
To pressure the vice
Thought
president,
we'd go there today,
state
but apparently it's next time. But that's all right.
officials,
You're prepared,
and
you know.
others to overturn the election. Let me leave you today with one clip to preview what you will see in one of our hearings to come. This is the testimony of White House lawyer Eric Hirschman. John Eastman called Mr. Hirschman the day after January 6th, and here is how that conversation went.
I said to him, "Are you out of your effing mind?" Right? I said, I only want to hear two words coming out of your mouth from now on. Orderly transition.
Okay, so this guy didn't want to challenge. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Not very powerful, folks. Not powerful at all.
At the conclusion of last week's hearing, we showed you a video of rioters explaining why they had come to Washington on January 6th. It was because Donald Trump told them to be here. Today we heard about some of the lies Donald Trump embraced and amplified when it became clear he didn't have the numbers of votes to win the election. We heard about how officials at different levels of government explored claims of fraud and found no evidence. Yet the former president continued to repeat those false claims over and over again. Today, we'll end things where we did on Thursday, back on January 6th, hearing words of individuals who wanted to stop the transfer of power. We know they were there because of Donald Trump. Now we hear some of the things they believed. Without objection, I enter into the record a video presentation.
I know exactly what's going on right now. Fake election. They think they're gonna fucking cheat us out of our vote and put communist fucking Biden in office. It ain't fucking happening today, buddy. You voted?
Yes, sir.
How'd it go?
Voted early. It went well, except for can't really trust the software. Dominion software all over.
We voted, and right in the top right-hand corner of the Dominion voting machine that we used, there was a Wi-Fi symbol with 5 bars. So that most definitely connected to the internet, without a doubt. So they stole that from us twice. We're not doing it anymore. We're not taking it anymore. So we're standing up, we're here, and whatever happens, we're not laying down again.
I'm from Pennsylvania. It didn't work. It absolutely worked. It didn't work. No. Trust the system. 200,000 people that weren't even registered voted. 430,000 votes disappeared from President Trump's tally. And you can't stand there and tell me that it worked.
I don't want to say that what we're doing is right. But if the election's being stolen, what is it going to take?
The chair requests those in the hearing room remain
Or at least,
seated until the Capitol Police have escorted members from the room. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
All right, folks, that's the end of them. Let's do a couple things here real quick. Let's go back and let's finish, and then I got to drop off, folks. Let's go back to Navarro. We were at the Green Bay sweep. So, you know what, let me not do this. I'm not going to do that because I'll do a podcast, and I'll keep this in the can for later because that's what apparently the next hearing is going to be. Let's go to Google. Let's see if we can, let's let Dinesh D'Souza, Google Chrome. Boom, there he is. This is Dinesh D'Souza. He is going to debunk the debunks that have been done against him, okay? So let's take a listen. I think he does it in this one. If I don't have the right one, I'll try to correct it. But you heard Bill Barr saying that there's nothing to all this. You heard them say that he claimed fraud, and they pick out the big ones, the ones that later, you know, the Dominion software and all that stuff, okay? They pulled that out. That's what a show trial is, all right? Now, they should not have stuck in the 2,000 mules because this is going to be one that we can easily correct their debunking. Let's do that, and we'll come back and talk about it.
Precision and the accuracy of geo-tracking based upon an expert that he interviewed, one guy who said, well, it's only accurate to about 30 feet. Well, that's not true, but let's say it is true. I don't think it changes our conclusions at all for the simple reason that you've got a drop box and you've got a mule within 30 feet. Remember, a human body is 5 or 6 feet, so 30 feet puts you basically within 3 or 4 human lengths of the drop box. You're in that vicinity. You're in that geo-fence or circle. Okay. And if it was only one drop box, you could say, well, wait a minute, maybe the guy was, stopped to eat some popcorn, or was reaching for his wallet, happened to stop within that radius. But this is why True the Vote's high bar, and by the high bar I mean 10 boxes, totally settles the issue. Because quite frankly, if you're within 30 feet of 10 or more drop boxes, obviously you are going to those drop boxes to do what? Well, there's only one thing you can do. See, remember, these aren't post boxes. You can't be writing a letter to your best friend from college. These drop boxes have one purpose, and that is to put in mail-in ballots. They're ballot drop boxes, so the only reason to go to them is to dump ballots. So, in fact, there's a guy, who made a comment on social media. He goes, Dinesh, he goes, listen, what if I were to show that your phone was within 30 feet of a bunch of gay bathhouses? Would you be okay with me saying that you're a regular frequenter of gay bathhouses, Dinesh, and that I have proof that you did that? And I replied in a kind of a quote tweet, and I said, hey, pal, listen, if you can find my phone within 30 feet of, let's say, 10 or more gay bathhouses in the period of, let's say, 2 weeks, yeah, you can reasonably conclude that I'm a regular customer. Why else would I be within a close vicinity of not 1, not 2, not 3, but 10 or more bathhouses? So yes, use your own common sense and draw your own conclusions. Now, Philip Bump comes back here and he goes, the January 6th situation wasn't the same because all that the geo-tracking is doing is showing whether or not people are in the vicinity of a large building. It's not trying to pinpoint their location with complete accuracy. And I say that's not true. That's not true because if you look at the case that the government is making, it's not just a matter of we're going to use the geo-tracking to show that this guy was within, 30 feet of the Capitol. They've got to prove that the guy was inside the building, which is to say he was inside the door.
All right, he's now going on to talk about the difference of, I thought he was going to say one more point, which is, again, the high bar of 10. And again, Bill Barr just goes with that, like that could have happened to anybody, but that's not true. So if you go and then he says also, I don't have time to follow it today. Maybe we'll bring it for next time. But the other thing he points out is they say, hey, I didn't have enough video. Well, I gave you the video I had, but some states that were supposed to have the video didn't have the video. And therein lies another point about the problem and the irregularities. You start with these new things. You start with mail-in balloting. You start with drop boxes. I never heard of drop boxes in my entire life, and I've been voting a long time. So anyway, I just wanted to play that real quick debunk there of what Bill Barr had to say. And again, I think otherwise the committee, for what they were trying to do and that they were a show committee, I mean, I think they scored some points in having some people there. Again, the problematic nature of what they're doing is there's no opposition, which I think they think it helps them, it hurts them, right? And I think the average American has a sense of justice, isn't going to kind of reject that. That being said, I think today they did sort of show that Trump, at least sometimes after the election, believed a lot of fantastic claims that ultimately turned out not to be true. I think they probably effectively showed that he was looking for anything to prove what he already believed. So I do think they scored some points. I don't think they scored as many points as they believed they scored with clear partisans. I mean, clearly you had some people that were in there in the White House that we all know that Trump was being undermined. So they were looking for any chance to flip on him, and at this point they're going to go all in. So the fact that you called out that PAC guy who was supposedly investigating the Georgia stuff and he wasn't honest enough to go, yeah, the poll watchers left after they left. See, that's what started that whole conspiracy. Right? Had they been there the whole time, then nobody would have said, hey, what's with that, right? Because the poll watchers would have been there. I'm like, what are you doing? Oh, this is our equipment. We just put it under the table. Now we're bringing it back out. The whole reason it's controversial is because they were told to leave, and they kept counting votes. He doesn't mention that. And this guy, after he wasn't really looking for fraud, got fired. Right? And the reason he got fired is because he wasn't looking for the fraud. So I think those witnesses were somewhat effective, but not as effective as January 6th thinks they were. But we shall see. I'm not really sure when we're going to tune back in for the next hearing. I think they're this week, so it may be Wednesday, but we will definitely live stream it whenever it is. If you follow us on Twitter or you subscribe to us on YouTube, you'll get a notification when we go live. But anyway, if you enjoyed this, hope you tune back into the next one.